What is going on, everybody? Patrick Connor here, and welcome back to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We're doing boxing history, contemporary boxing, shaking some hands. I'm here with my boy Aris Pina, who's, of course, a history maniac like myself, but a Compubox operator. Going to play into this conversation a little bit here. We had some boxing this past weekend. Like I said, going to tie it into history. What's up, Paris?
Going on, man? Like you said, we had definitely had an eventful weekend for the sport of boxing.
You know, it wasn't quite the marathon card that we had a couple weekends ago coming from Saudi Arabia, where, I mean, that was like a real marathon card for better and worse because there was some good boxing on it, but man, it just took a long ass time. That's all I'm saying. It's a fucking all day thing. However, that being said, there was still quite a bit of boxing coming from New York this past weekend, but it also involved one of the sport's biggest stars, without question. Tank Davis is one of the biggest attractions in the sport right now. Definitely a pound for pound player, but his reputation took a little bit of a hit with the help from a really bad referee move in the middle of a fight. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened, but we're also going to talk about we've already talked about it before, another show, but we're going to revisit it because why not? Bad referee decisions, moves, whatever you want to call it. And here we are.
I mean, referees have always been an integral part of the sport, obviously, since the very beginning of it. But as in any sport, referees make bad calls, sometimes really bad ones, to the point where it becomes the central focus of the entire event. And that goes for all sports. You know what I mean? There's been fuck ups in basketball and football and all that, but boxing gets much more blatant sometimes because of the implications that it has and just the amount of people involved. There's only three people there, the two fighters and the referee. And when the referee sometimes makes himself the central focus of a fight because of either one bad call or several bad calls in a fight, then things get talked about. And that was the main thing that happened this past Saturday. So Lamont Roach Jr. fought Tank Davis, Gervonta Davis, and for Davis's WBA lightweight championship. Roach was moving up in weight. And this was one of those fights that everyone was just kind of assuming again from the beginning that was another cherry pick for Tank. I mean, Roach was a good fighter. And this is I'm going to talk about beforehand. Like everyone looked upon as Roach as a good fighter, a competent guy who, scrapped his way to the top after struggling a little bit to get there, but looked upon as being a notch below Davis, as most Davis opponents are. And Davis has been also known to pick guys and choose guys of who he knows he can beat. So everyone kind
Former
of
sparring partner and
exactly, yeah, former sparring partner. Even during the buildup, you could tell because Tank has always been feisty with his opponents and starting this and doing that. That those two, even though they were talking shit back and forth, that was in a friendly manner. We even talked about it a few times. You could tell they were friends. Like it wasn't. There's nothing like really like
yeah.
vengeful or really personal about it. But that being said, it was just one of those fights. It was one of the fights that all of us predicted that well, probably was going to end between the middle rounds to the later rounds in Davis's favor. Didn't happen like that at all.
No, that's not how it unfolded at all. And look, obviously we were wrong. A lot of people were wrong. And so that's not to shy away from that fact whatsoever or to take away anything from Lamont Roach. I think that a lot of it just had to do with the circumstances around the fight. Lamont Roach, like we said, former sparring partner, that tends to carry a little bit of a connotation in and of itself, where if you're a sparring partner, you're often like seen, true or not, as a notch below the person hiring you as a sparring partner. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, and on top of that, coming up in weight, like you also mentioned, that is significant when you're fighting somebody like Gervonta Davis, who's a heavy puncher, and who also has in the past had issues making weight, which tends to suggest that he cuts weight to get to 135. So if you're cutting weight to get to 135, then you're fighting somebody who's coming up from the division below you. I mean, it's not a very good look, and I think that that's also what led to us thinking, he's walking into a situation where it's a showcase. He's meant to look good. He's meant to get the win. And on top of that, it's kind of like I think people are starting to get a little bit impatient because that win over Ryan Garcia was like a little while ago now. It's been a little bit. and you can't stand on it for too long. Like, yeah, it was a big event, it did great, and it was popular and everything, but you also kind of have to view like where Ryan Garcia is right now, where he's been busier than Tank Davis in the wake of that loss to Tank Davis. So it's not a very good look going into the fight, and that definitely shaped the perception of how people watched it, no question. And they were probably being harsh judging against Tank Davis for those reasons in the fight. But again, not to take anything away from Lamont Roach. He did the exact right thing. I didn't think he did the right thing early on. I was kind of like, dude, he's really playing with fire. But once he kind of settled into a groove and it was clear that he knew what he was doing, punching with Tank Davis and kind of like countering his counters and stuff like that, he did a really good job. He had the right game plan, and he did to Gervonta Davis what really nobody else has been able to do, at least not consistently over the course of the fight. That's without even dipping into any of the referee nonsense.
Sure. So I'll go off and say it too from the bat. I worked the show this past weekend, and I was doing the stats for Roach, and I was surprised too initially. But I mean, like, well, not so much surprised initially first because I had a feeling Davis, even though we knew he was a favorite, he was probably going to give up the early rounds because he always does give up the early rounds. That's his thing. Excuse me. The broadcast announcers, I fucking hate this term, but they kept on saying, "Oh, Davis is downloading his data. He's downloading his data." That stupid term that got popular during Lomachenko's rise or whatever. But he such a
I know
stupid.
it's a really hipstery kind of just like
And the guy's not sitting
phrase
on
of
the
the
phone
day type
computer
of
typing all
term.
this dumb shit up, like whatever. But regardless of anything, what I was impressed with Roach initially on was that unlike other Davis opponents who might steal rounds from him early, Roach wasn't backing up. Like a lot of guys have a problem. Their problem with Davis is that even though Davis isn't doing much, he's always the one on the front foot, pushing you back, putting pressure on you. And these guys are always boxing off the back foot. And eventually you can only do that for so long before you start wilting. Kind of like what happened with Frank Martin in Davis's last fight. So when that was happening, instead of doing that, Roach was pushing on it and was actually walking ahead. He was being very patient. But the thing that was like smart about it, unlike Ryan Garcia, who was trying to, push the action too, but he was being like a reckless idiot. Roach was like being really patient. Like he had his hands up. He was like picking his shots when he needed to, when he wasn't taking risks that weren't unnecessary. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, they was forming spar partners. So Roach knew what Davis can do, and he's like, knew him very well. So it wasn't like he was walking into unknown and anything like that. But the fact that he was walking in and doing like staying in the pocket and making Davis back up as opposed to Davis trying to walk him down was impressive, and it worked for him. So those early rounds for tit for tat, but I guess the judges and the unofficial judge Larry Hazard for that matter, were more impressed because Davis was landing and throwing the harder shots, like the more eye catching stuff. Roach was doing really good work. He was outlanding Davis in the majority of the rounds, not by much. That's why this fight was so close. He was only outlanding him by like one or two punches or so each round on average, but he was still outboxing Davis in little stretches. But Davis being the bigger star and people just, getting enamored by the more eye-catching shit that he does was was edging him those rounds because of that. I mean, there was probably a few other factors there too, but like in the first half of the fight, it looked like Davis was, in relative control, especially what was it, like round six or so when he started talking to him. And,
Yeah, he kind of looked like he was settling into a groove. He does this thing where like the a lot of Gervonta Davis fights follow a similar pattern where in the early rounds he tends to be a little bit inactive. Call it whatever the fuck you want with the downloading data thing, but he definitely is getting different looks and a big uh he's definitely a weird character outside the ring. But when it comes to inside the ring, he's obviously very smart and he knows what he's doing and he's done it a lot where he is constantly probing and reading from his opponent what he's doing or what the opponent is doing when he feints.
Mhm.
And one of the things he opens up doing in most of his fights is body shots, hard body shots, bring the guard down, make them more stationary. And then on top of that, like they hurt, they do damage because he's a hard puncher, he's a heavy puncher. And it also gets them thinking. That's a big part of it that you were kind of mentioning earlier is that once he starts applying that pressure and once that they start going down that road, most opponents start kind of wilting mentally. Like they start whatever plan they had in mind, whatever pattern or whatever it was they were doing before that, it stops. Like Frank Martin had a few good rounds where he was doing fairly well and doing similar, but once the body shots started landing, it was like, oh shit, okay. And that was a big difference here was on that second half of the fight, Lamont Roach, instead of just folding, kind of readjusted and was like, all right, he's starting to kind of ramp up the pressure. So what I need to do is I need to punch when he's punching. When he opens up, punch and move. Punch, find a new angle, punch, find a new angle, and get his jab working, which he did. And he did a really good job. I thought that, just kind of cutting straight to the chase as far as what I thought happened, I thought Lamont Roach deserved to take a close decision. If somebody else said Gervonta Davis won that fight close, I'm not going to argue too much. It was a pretty close fight. There were some nip and tuck rounds, no question. The big issue was what was that round
I,
nine,
yeah.
where just kind of out of nowhere. Although I mean, it wasn't totally out of nowhere to be honest, dude. Lamont Roach was starting to get momentum on his side. That's factual. You know what I'm saying? Tank Davis can tweet whatever he wants, but it that even the commentators who overall were pretty pro Tank Davis were recognizing like, Tank's falling behind here. He's starting to like this is not good. And then out of kind of nowhere, at least in terms of the action, he just turned to the side, took a knee, and then ran to his corner. And then his corner jumped up on the apron. And then Steve Willis runs over and's like, kind of like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Clearly admonishes him and says something to the effect of, if you take a knee, that's a knockdown, but then doesn't call the knockdown. The action resumes. And then the Tank Davis spends a significant portion of the next two rounds fouling and hitting the shit out of Lamont Roach's dick. Like, I mean, it was that's not. I know it's boxing. Somebody's gonna say, "Oh, you want something? Go watch golf." Fuck that. I'm not fucking watching golf anyway, motherfucker. But either way, I can't. It's not wrong to have an expectation of like a fair shot going on here. And what really wound up looking like happened over the last several rounds, and I think where me and many others had an issue is that it almost looked as if Lamont Roach didn't have a chance to win from the outset. If they're not even going to call a knock, you can't take a knee. Regardless of what it's from, somebody can try to bring up some obscure rule about if there's something in your eye. You can't just take a knee because there's something in your eye. It doesn't work like that, dude. You know what you can do? You could take a knee when there's something in your eye when you're the star on the card. It's that simple because nobody else can. You're not supposed to be able to get any sort of break. You're not for anything unless there's some egregious injury or like you look and like a dude's arm is like fucking hanging because he fucking broke it in the thing and he's like hold on that yeah we've seen shit like that happen, but to just be able to just take a knee because you feel like it is no good. You can't do it. So, and on top of that, the big issue with the whole knee thing is that would have been the difference in the fight, and Lamont Roach would have won the decision had that been counted as a knockdown. So that's a really bad look from the New York State Athletic Commission. It's a bad look from Steve Willis. Some people are saying he should resign. I guess. I mean, if nobody's fucking coming out and saying Joe Cortez needs to resign after Mayweather Ortiz, we'll get to those types of things later, but I don't know, dude. It does look really bad, but the problem is that listen to the silence since then. Nobody gives a fuck. That's the problem. Is that it's so fucking routine that a ref or an official is going to fuck up like this that everybody's kind of like, okay, move on, go to the rematch. Not a good look.
I mean, on Twitter, there's been a lot of, yelling and complaining about it and trying to get at least an explanation of what went on. And to that point, have that happening now, it's the New York State Athletic Commission has said that they're doing an investigation at least and looking into what happened in that round and all that. The thing that I find really odd and not even odd, it's just absolute bullshit on their end to try to say this and a really shitty way of trying to cover in their asses, in fact, is they said that they didn't have there was some kind of technical issue going on that they didn't have a chance to review it in real time. The fuck do you mean? There was already like
If
four different monitors
if
revved up.
Amazon can, then why can't you?
Yeah, like everybody had it really ready to go.
Yeah,
What do you
if
mean you can't
PBC
go to
can, why
anything?
can't you?
There's there's no conceivable way within 5 seconds of that happening, there was already replays really revved up and all that just
It
for
was
that
on
to
Twitter. You could have fucking go log on Twitter and there's motherfuckers.
anybody could they could have found a way, and they really have the nerve to say, well, we couldn't do it in the allotted time or whatever it was.
Well,
Fuck
then
off.
if that's true, then these people have grown so elderly and inept and fucking non-computer
Yeah,
efficient that they need to get the fuck out. I
yeah,
don't
the
know.
whole thing would just eviscerate the whole crew. But they said now that they're looking into it and all that, I don't know if they're gonna overturn it. They should overturn it. If it was anything was actually real about it, there should be. But it's not gonna happen. But I mean, Willis definitely needs to be held accountable for his actions. Referees in any jurisdiction for that matter, very rarely I know get a uh speak in public about what they did. And I'm pretty sure Willis will follow the same course. He's not going to speak publicly about this. But it was a fuck up. Not even, it was a massive one, an absolutely massive one with huge repercussions. And they need to be held accountable about this. And if they have any type of stones and if they're going to do the right thing, they need to they need to take the proper steps to make sure that this gets flipped over. If they're going to do an investigation that can possibly change the results or whatever it may be, then they need to do it because there's no other way to show it. Gervonta Davis got hit twice. He got hit with a right hand that clearly bothered his eye a little bit. Then he got hit with a jab. Was it a hard jab? No, but still, it doesn't even matter. Even if you get grazed, you take a knee, that's called a knockdown. And what's even worse is that Willis started counting. He got to like 3 or 4, and then he
Yeah,
just inexplicably
he
stopped.
initially was going to call it a knockdown. That's what
Yeah, and then
was
he started counting, and then he stopped. He was just
well,
kind of like,
and then
whoa.
so another thing we didn't address is the next issue that his team jumped on the apron, which during the round is supposed to be an automatic disqualification.
And that has happened in the past for lesser fights. For instance, when
Carlos Molina,
I was about
fucking,
to bring exactly Carlos Molina against James Kirkland, for instance. When
and he
Molina,
was
who
giving him the business.
yes, Molina was winning that fight hands down. And Kirkland came on late, dropped Molina. I mean, you got to blame the corner, but at the same time, the corner thought that the bell, like the round had ended. They didn't go in there on purpose to try to save him. But still, it was a fuck up. I remember the referee saying, "I can't believe you did that" or something like that, and then he disqualified him. Um, Barrera's corner coming in during Junior Jones
Yep.
during the
Yeah, yeah,
Junior,
yeah.
and they got disqualified. Um, there's other instances. I mean, there's other odd ones too, where you're just kind of like head scratching that the referee allowed it. Where, for instance, when Larry Holmes, Jerry Cooney, when Cooney hit Holmes with the worst low blow imaginable, Holmes is in the corner getting fucking water sprayed down his pants and drinking chugs of water from Ray Arcel while he's sitting there getting patted down, and Cooney's getting no attention in the other corner.
And also when Lou Duva started up onto the apron during Chavez Taylor 1
Yeah,
and
sure.
nothing happened from that. That's kind of like an extra argument against Meldrick Taylor, unfortunately, too. But in any case, point being, that's just another layer of this that makes it really not look good for Tank Davis at all.
I've
And
never, in all the years we've watched boxing, bro, and if you combine our years now, we're close to 60 or so. But it's like, I've never, and I think you can say the same thing, I've never seen a guy take a knee, not get a call against him, and they had his face wiped.
yeah, yeah, and then get addressed, and then also basically have the opportunity to get some coaching too for no reason, which they're not supposed to do. And then on top of that, have the ref just be like, "Okay, buddy, no, do your best." Fuck, come on, bro.
And then, like, Steve Willis really told him, he says, when you take a knee that looks like a knockdown, because it is a knockdown.
That's exactly you. Yeah, you're correct, Steve. That's exactly what it is, and that's exactly how you should have called it. You should have gone with your instinct on that, but you fucked it up. So, and
This is the second big televised fight in a row he's fucked up. I mean, listen, that first one with the heavyweights that he was working, I'm not gonna hold that one that much against him, even though it was odd the way that ended. How he was like counting both guys out, and then inexplicably he just said fuck it in the sky to disqualify one guy. But like, in the heat of that moment, I can
yeah,
almost
when
understand
something's
it because
crazy, like when
it
something
was just
crazy
absolutely
happens,
insane.
it's like,
Yeah.
fuck. Like it's tough to hold that against like an official.
And I don't think, and no one was really even bringing up that subject about it. They were just complaining about the fight in general, not Steve Willis's call. But this one is just inexplicable. This is the worst thing I have ever seen a referee. I mean, in the U.S. in a big high profile fight. Well, again, we'll talk about some other shit because
Yeah.
There's been some blatant levels of just straight fuckery out there
Yeah.
before. Like
Some about Italian referees, bro. I'm telling you something. Something about Italian referees are doing some funny stuff sometimes.
one's in
But
Argentina as well. But
yeah. Yeah, and well,
yeah,
and I guess I'll say before we start getting into the history stuff, I guess the last little miniature rant I'll say here, and you kind of started getting into it, is that, there's hardly ever any penalties for this kind of stuff. And on the contrary, it's actually the exact opposite, is that we've consistently seen a number of referees who aren't good and are like, constantly not performing well, constantly blowing calls, getting them wrong, putting fighters in danger in some cases, and they're not only not getting admonished, but dude, this is, I'm going to kind of make a remark that some people might get pissed at because they're going to deem it like political, but it's like cops, bro. It's like the fucking thin blue line where like they circle the wagons around these officials. And maybe about 15 or so years ago was when they first started instituting a policy, maybe 12, where they started instituting a policy in most state commissions where the referees were instructed to, after fights, not speak to the media. Whereas before, like, dude, you could get quotes from Mills Lane after his fights all the fucking time. He used to talk to the media all the time. But at the same time, however you feel about Mills Lane, he held himself accountable. He was accountable for whatever calls he made. Sometimes he made bad calls. Sometimes he defended the bad calls he made. But at the very least, he answered questions and he made himself available to the media. In the last 12 years or so, it's been a pretty clear policy
oh,
for
I
most.
gotta give him full credit for that.
Yeah, and no, 100%. And in the last like maybe, 10, 12 years, it's been totally the policy from state commissions that referees and officials aren't supposed to talk to the media at all. And I guess with the rise of social media, that probably makes sense. And from a, liability standpoint also probably makes sense. But there's very little accountability. You see the same faces, the same referees, often the same very bad referees. Like you just said, Steve Willis made a poor call in his last high profile fight, made a poor call here. What's going to happen? We're probably going to see him on TV again in the next few months without an issue. A lot of these officials, and this is more a systemic issue. And in some cases, it's a governmental, economic, or financial issue. A lot of fucking and I'm sure you know this for sure too, because you worked alongside a lot of these people. You've worked alongside a lot of the same state officials and shit like that. This is not a full-time gig for them. They might work one fucking gig every like once a month or something like that. And I mean, but some of them also are overworked, like the fucking like the gosh, the people who oversee, the people who show up and they're like the overseers.
Mhm.
Those people are overworked because there's very few of them, but there's a lot of referees and judges and shit like that. So my point is that this is not really like a profession for a lot of them. Most of them, like for instance, Steve Willis, he does like stand-up comedy and he does like a whole bunch of other yeah, bro. He does a whole bunch of other shit. That's not even his main gig, boxing refereeing.
Oh yeah, well, I
That's what
mean,
he's known for, especially because all the fucking like the TikToks with him and the fucking like fucking crazy faces and shit. But nonetheless, it's a problem, dude. Like in at least Steve Willis is not like an elderly person who keeps going in there despite the fact that they're like 89 years old and like judging fights. At least there's that. But this is an issue with boxing officials, dude, and it's an issue with it being an insular fucking circle jerk ass group that there's rarely new blood. When there is, the new blood gets pushed out by the old cranky fucks who don't want anything to change, and on we go. So that is also going to be why we're going to see a number of the same referees doing the same stupid bullshit what we're talking about today.
1,000%. It's one of those things that, sometimes you can be like, oh yeah, that referee had a bad day, but when it has like implications where it completely fucks up a fighter's career trajectory, like it did for Lamont Roach. Like, yes, Roach's career has changed now from this. Absolutely. This was the biggest high profile fight of his career, and he put on the best
Could have been
performance.
coming off a win over Tank Davis.
It came off a win. That's exactly. There's a huge thing in terms of money and everything else between a win and just a draw. And Willis fucked that up. because after that, after round from like round 8 or 9, Roach was in control of that fight. He outboxed Davis. Davis got flustered, especially after that, claiming the hair grease shit got in his eye. And it
Oh yeah,
was,
I forgot to even mention yeah, I forgot to even
I mean,
mention
we'll get
that.
to that in a minute too, because that's just absolutely hysterical. But like, um, it was just one of those things that it's just really unfortunate, because you see a guy who was a huge underdog. And again, like we both said, all of us underestimated him in this fight. He puts on a career best performance, absolutely should have won. And he gets it taken away from him just because of boxing fuckery. And it's not fair. It's really not fair because, a lot of times, and I'm not saying this is going to happen in this rematch because they're inevitably going to have a rematch. But a lot of times it's happened over the course of history where a guy will put on a career best performance, like just the absolute best thing of their life, and they get fucked over, whether it's by the decision or this way or that, whatever it is, somehow they get fucked. And they're never really the same after that. They're just like something in them just like gets like pulled out of them from getting that snatched away. And then when there's a rematch, the guy that initially that they're supposed to lose to, the champion that got whooped in that first fight ends up coming back, obviously looking better. The first guy now feels a little bit more deflated, and then he just,
Lewis Walcott.
yeah, well, Walcott was still putting on a good fight in the rematch before he got caught, no?
Oh, I mean, like he wasn't doing poorly, but he
Yeah,
definitely didn't do as good as the first fight.
exactly. Well, here's another one too. I guess a good, more recent example would be Bones Adams and Paulie Ayala. Remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
Remember
that
that
was
first fight? Bones definitely won that first fight. Like he outboxed him, he outfought him.
yeah. Paulie caught a lot of luck during his career,
He did,
unfortunately.
especially during his like hot run after he beat Tapia that first time. But Paulie was on a tremendous run during that time. He was what was it, 98 or 99 ring fighter of the year. He was around all, like he was a really hot commodity and popular. And then like when Bones fought him that first time and Adams beat him, I thought he beat him. I don't, do you remember watching that? It's been a lot of years since I watched it, but I remember pretty sure he beat him.
I'm not certain that I've watched it again, but I remember watching it live. I thought he beat him.
Yeah. And in their rematch, he had nothing. He just, he was just kind of like off. But um, I don't know.
I
Hopefully
mean,
that's
he'd been around a while. By the time even the first fight, he'd been around a while.
oh, absolutely too. He was a teenager, I think, when he challenged Orlando Canizales initially for a world title. So I mean, guy was definitely around for a long time. Sometimes you lose it, but I mean, there's just a lot of guys when they go into rematches and stuff. Like, yes, they're more motivated and they talk a lot, but it just something's off. But I hope that's not the case for Roach. He turned me into a big fan of his that weekend from the way he handled himself all throughout the up until lead into the fight. He seemed very confident, and I did note that about him. And then the way he handled himself during the fight, like, he did come under fire plenty of times where it looked like I was like, oh no, he might get
Yeah.
overwhelmed.
And he
And
didn't foul back. He didn't turn into a
oh,
fucking asshole. And even after the fight, he was still gracious, even though he felt he got robbed. I mean, like, he spoke his mind, but he wasn't a dickhead about it.
oh, absolutely. And he hasn't really been a dickhead on Twitter either since then. He's been mad cool
Yeah,
about just answering things and all that.
that's
And
not
like,
the situation we want to see, man. It's just not the
oh,
situation we want to see.
he
And like,
deserved that W. He absolutely did. But I mean, what's really crazy though is that overnight his fortune has changed. Now all the lightweights want to fight him. As you see, Shakur
well,
called him
at
out.
least there's that. I mean,
Sure,
that's kind of a shitty consolation. He should have the W, but at least there's that.
it
But
is. Yeah.
I think what really, what screws it up here, and at least a portion of what screws it up, and I talked about this before we started recording, was that like, that was his chance. That was his chance. He caught him off guard. Now he won't catch
Exactly.
him off guard again. Tank knows. Now he knows exactly what to expect, and he's going to have more time to prepare and more time to be in better shape or whatever it is. And he's not going to be able to catch him off guard like that again. So that was his chance. That's what's fucked up. You know what I mean? So I'm with you. I'd like to see a rematch. A rematch is the fair and just thing to do, but it's not the right situation. It's fucked
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. It
It
should be
should
more
be
than
coming into
Roach
the rematch with Tank needing revenge.
exactly as Roach is the champion, 1,000%. Thanks a lot, Steve Willis. And that's what we're getting into today. We're getting into it that we're talking about.
Good
Well, again,
segue.
yeah, we, it's the first time we did this show was about 3 years ago. The way we did about referee performances and all that. And not to say that there's been like so many since those 3 years. There didn't that definitely been some. But like, not to say there's been so many that we just need to do it. It's just that this was such a blatantly bad one that was good to revisit it. And then as we started talking about it, we realized that there was a few over the course of history that I don't think we covered in the first one. That was just like, holy shit, you know? So yeah, we're gonna talk about, shitty referee performances. And it's funny too with the referees because like I kind of mentioned in a earlier comment, there's some of them that are so blatantly that they're just like, okay, this dude probably was in the bag on some kind of shit like this. And then there was other ones where no, they just get flustered and fucked up because they suck. And a lot of them that they look like they're probably more in the bag happened in the earlier of the 19th century as opposed to like later on, right? So that being said, we're going back to 1912 for our first guy we're going to bring up here. And the first fight I want to bring up in terms of a referee just being an absolute fuck up and everyone going around going, wait, what happened? Was lightweight champion Ad Walgast against challenger Mexican Joe Rivers. So I'll preface this in saying as a plug, you and I were both featured recently on a documentary featuring Ad Walgast. Well, go ahead.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say that you were featured. I narrated it, but
Yeah, I
you
mean, but
were.
both were featured on it. You're the narrator of this, so I mean, yeah,
Well, I really, really hope. I don't know what the status of. We won't get too far into it. I don't know what the status of the documentary is, but it's super fucking cool. I know I personally know there was a ton of work put into it because I've known the dude who did it. I don't know how much we're supposed to say because, well, no, we could say it because he posted about it. Jordan Singleton. He put a shitload of work into it, and I know that he did because when he first started talking about doing it, we were emailing back and forth. I gave him a bunch of newspaper resources that he expanded on for sure. And he got a hold of some really, really great photos that he did some amazing editing on. And then also got a hold of some really great footage too of the fights. And so, I mean, that being said, hopefully it gets a chance that other people get to see the documentary and everything because it's great, but it also gives a glimpse into what Ad Wolgast was like as a fighter and why, that also ties into this fight you're talking about, Ad Wolgast versus Mexican Joe Rivers. Actually, I think they had two or three fights, and this was their first one. So this is like the main one. And I mean, it was for the most part what you would expect from an Ad Wolgast fight around this time, which was mayhem.
absolutely. So we've talked about this lightweight division from over on different episodes, stuff like that, but it's very fascinating to think this was actually a new era that was being ushered in. When the tie into the documentary you're talking about, the documentary is about, the fight with Ad Walgas and Badland Nelson, which is one of the most brutal fights that ever taken place in boxing history. And just like you said, a fascinating documentary into the lives of both men, but it's also gives a glimpse into a changing of the guard, so to speak. So at the turn of the century, the lightweight division and boxing in general, like we said, was changing rapidly. But there was a whole section of like just incredible, like one of the deepest eras in deepest eras in lightweight history. But you had guys like Joe Gans battling Nelson, the aforementioned battling Nelson, Aurelio Herrera, Elbows McFadden, Kid Levine. Um, I'm sure I'm missing a couple others around that time, but like Frank Ernie, obviously, who became champion, and a few others. But like that was an incredible era. And that era, by the time that Ad Walgas stopped battling Nelson to become lightweight champion, it was almost like a new era was starting to be ushered in. Yeah, so there was still a kind of guy, a couple of guys from the old guard still left over, but Gans I think, was dead by that point. Levine had been retired. Elbows McFadden, Frank Ernie had been done. And now you had guys like Ad Walgas, you had Freddie Welsh from England, you had Willie Ritchie who was about to come on, um, and also Mexican Joe Rivers. Like this was, and also Owen Moran was another one I wanted to mention. So this was like the new crop that was starting to build in the 1910s. A very exciting time in boxing. So with this fight with Walgas and Rivers, it was like you said, absolute mayhem to begin with. Walgas was one of those guys you had no idea what was going to come in a fight. You just knew it was going to be excitement. All right. He had a modicum of skill in terms of like he knew what he was doing in there. Like he wasn't just absolute mayhem as a guy like Nelson, so to speak, but like all of his fights just became free for alls usually. And then sometimes there would be some controversy. And in this fight with Mexican Joe Rivers, well, ended up being a lot of it. The one remaining factor in it was the referee, who was a guy by the name of Jack Welsh. Jack Welsh was a popular referee back in the early 1900s who had been involved in a number of fights, but also a number of controversial ones. A few, including Walgast, who it came to find out they were buddies. But anyways, in this fight, I'll just kind of cut to it. It was what round did it say it was that happened? Round 13.
Yeah.
So it was round 13 in a bruising fight that it looked like Rivers, who didn't have the experience of Walgas. I think he had like under 20 fights at this point, but Walgas, lightweight champion and rampage guy. Rivers was going toe to toe with him. And not only that, he was getting the better of it in a lot of times. And Walgas, who had a long career at this point, was, starting to show signs of slowing down. And Rivers was, giving him the business. And it goes down to round 13, one of the most wildest things that could happen and only could happen in boxing, and this is the early instance of boxing history. They're kind of in a clinch, and from all accounts, Rivers backs up and threw a beautiful straight right hand that caught Walguest straight on the chin. And Walguest is instantly knocked out. I mean, he's like unconscious, but he's just done. But here's the catch: at the same time that Rivers landed that right hand, Walgas threw a fucking body shot that ended up straying extremely low. Whether he did that on purpose or not, who knows? Probably on purpose, but he ends up landing a nasty low blow. I mean, I can't even imagine what kind of like lack of cup they were using back then, if anything. So
Yeah, like a fucking piece of steel or some shit covering your wang. God
yeah.
damn.
So
The crunch factor on
understandably,
that bitch would have been awful.
understandably, Rivers goes in agony, and Walgas falls on like Rivers starts falling down. Walgas, who's unconscious from the punch he just got hit with, falls on top of Rivers. Looks like a scene from Rocky 2 at the end of it, basically, right? But here comes the controversy that Jack Welch, who was the referee and seeing all this happen, walks up to both guys and instead of counting over both of them simultaneously, grabs Walgas, starts pulling him up, and starts counting over Rivers. And then he ends up counting out Rivers. And then the whole crowd is very confused about what the fuck just happened because they were like, wait a minute, did we just see the referee pick up one guy and
Yeah,
count
he's
off?
like a weekend at Bernie's, this motherfucker, like walking him, going like, and the winner, it's like, what the fuck?
And before you knew it, referee Jack Welch goes, Walgast is winner. Jumps out of the ring and runs out of the arena before anyone knew what happened. Explain to me, Pat, what happened?
Well, I mean, in theory, what happened was that Ad Wolgast. So around this time in the early 1900s, as a lot of people who have followed the show and have heard us talk about a lot of history shit, or who have independently looked it up, know that around this time, the legality of boxing was in flux all over the place, and it was rarely static. It was often changing, sometimes state to state, city to city, county to county, et cetera, et cetera. And so there were a handful of places around the US where it was like, it was kind of always good to go. New Orleans was a big fight town around this time. And then often people were going to California because California was just kind of getting into this shit. And, it was the literal and proverbial wild, wild west because there wasn't a whole lot of regulation. There wasn't a whole lot of, people overseeing what was happening in the boxing, in the betting, etc. And so in Northern California, around San Francisco, and in and around Los Angeles, those were two kind of like fight hubs around this time. And Ad Wolgast, being somebody who was, willing to fight into the 40s in terms of rounds, definitely needed to be, more of a Wild West type of figure. And that's also how his style was. That's how a lot of the fighters who were fighting those long fights were, wild and sloppy, but just tough as a motherfucker. That was the name of the game for a lot of this lightweight division during that time. And Jack Welch was from San Francisco, so he was refereeing and officiating fights in and around San Francisco frequently. And, with boxing kind of just burgeoning at this time. And even now, of course, too, there's no difference. Officials know promoters, promoters know officials and referees and blah blah blah. Even me as a writer, when I would attend fights, I would be like, "Oh, hey, what's up?" To referees I would see all the time and stuff like that. It was all good. But people know each other. And so that's also kind of what makes it look really suspicious, apart from the actual fight looking suspicious. The dude hauling up the corpse of fucking Ad Wolgast. There's some photos there's video of it, but even before, if you'd never seen the video, there's photos of it of Mexican Joe Rivers like holding his crotch, looking up at what's, fucking Welsh like hauling Wolgast, and he's looking up, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, like what? He's got this look of like pained look on his face, like my
It's the
dick.
damnedest photo you will ever see. It's like the first time I ever read about this fight was in a Ring magazine from like 1996 or so.
Totally.
Because they had a list, and this is what I used to love about the Ring
They've
growing up.
revisited the fight probably about 15 times over the years and the issues that I have. And it's always like, it's the same type of, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
it was like a top 10 list of like controversies, and then they gave one, did the ref was the referee on the take, or was the fix in, or was it just
Yeah.
like fucked up? Like they were given two different theories. But reading that, I was just like, and there's that photo. And you see, like you said, Rivers is looking up, he's holding his fucking crotch, because like you said, he's probably wearing just like a metal nothing on there, and he
God.
just got
Yeah. And then the
drilled.
gloves, dude. Like,
Yeah. The horsehair shit just out.
God.
And so he's laying there, like you said, he has just this poor look. It's almost like a dog when they're looking up and you like kind of pull food away from them. They're like, why? Why? And he's just staring up like that, looking and in pain and confusion. And Walgast is like, he's literally, Pat, like you said, he's a fucking corpse. He's pulled up, he's just slumped over, like weakened at Bernie's. And Welsh, I guess, who was pretty strong, because I can't pull dead weight like that, starts dragging him away with one arm.
Wow. And he's only 135 pounds, but still.
Still, I mean, dead weight is dead weight.
Yeah. That's 135 pounds of dead weight. Yeah. It's true.
I've pushed my drunk friends who are tired before, trying to move them and stuff like that. It's not that easy. And like, he's pulling them with one arm while still counting with the other hand. Like, what the fuck? Mm-mm.
Jesus Christ, dude.
And
Yeah.
that was kind of like the Wild West of that time period back then too, because when I mentioned this fight to you beforehand, you said that, well, yeah, back then, man, it was really dangerous to give an announcement to like during letting stay in the ring because of how strapped everybody was back then, right? Like that was the type of era too, when guys like Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp were referees sometimes for fights. So you think they went into the ring without carrying their piece? Of course they didn't. And and a
Yeah. I don't
place
know, dude.
in a place like Vernon, California in 1912, I'm sure everyone had a strap on them. So people who lost money on that fight, I'm sure wouldn't be happy. And that's probably why Welsh ran the fuck out of there and hopped on a train before he found a newspaper reporter and told him, what happened. But it's absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. And that wasn't his only like instance either. I think I'd have to look. Let me see. Was he the referee for the Owen Moran fight as well?
He might have been. Well, let's take a
Yeah, let's look.
quick
All right.
look. No, no,
Oh, he
he was
wasn't?
he was not. But not too long after. Well, I guess a couple of years after this. It took a few years. He didn't referee another fight for 3 years, and
Oh,
that was also controversial. Willard Johnson. Okay,
oh shit.
that's you're not looking so good here, Jack Wells. Damn. No, I mean I don't personally think there was anything that suspicious about that
Oh,
fight.
Jack Welch was the referee for that for Owen Moran and Wildcast. He was.
Oh, was he?
Yeah. But no, there's that photo too where they said that Walgast hit Moran low to knock him out. And if you look at that photo, again, who knows, but like there's a photo of Moran on the canvas, what it looks uh what's that famous, I don't know, there's like a famous painting or something, and it looks like a ghost, the one with like the mouth just wide open.
Yeah, Edvard Munch, the Scream.
Yes, the scream. Perfect. You got it. The scream. And that's the face poor Owen Moran is making while he's laying on the ground holding his crotch, and Walgast is standing over him. Like he's trying to gasp all the breath that he had like left in his body. But I
Yeah,
don't know. It's just
which is pretty. I mean, if you look at the frickin' just the trajectory of Welsh's career, refereeing career is pretty weird, dude, because he only refereed a handful of fights over the last 4 fights in 12 years after this fight. So, I mean, he obviously, I would say that that tends to suggest he took a hit to his reputation after this fight. And on top of that, I mean, just kind of circling back to where you started, a lot of what I remember hearing about this fight before I, got super crazy stalker mode into history was that it was the double knockout fight. This is the double knockout fight, which is not really what happened. And there actually have been other actual double knockouts since. But I mean, that's how rare it is that, you never, it's something like you hear about and never happens.
Totally. It's absolutely very, very rare occurrence for a double knockdown, in fact, let alone a double knockout or a fight ending because both guys getting dropped. So it was always just a fascinating thing for me from a fascinating time period. And it's one of those fun fights that you can debate about. Do you think because it's been over way over 100 years, but it's still looking back when you do your research and be like, oh, do you think he like was on the take, or do you think he just fucked up and didn't know what was going on and just thought he was making the right call? Who knows? It's just one of those things that it's fun to talk about, debate about, and read about. So
The video's not even super clear either, to be honest.
never,
It's yeah, it's like pixelated
never.
as fuck, and you can't really see totally what happens. It just looks wonky, looks
I
fucking
would
weird.
love. I don't know if it would ever be possible. Maybe more television people would know this answer better than I would, but I would absolutely love if someone would be able to one day, um, like somebody would be able to like create like some kind of video system where I know there's a lot of restoration where people restore these old videos, these old fight videos where I've seen some incredibly clear Sam Langford footage where initially probably back in the day it looks like the two little speedy going running around. But they've like a lot of people have restored these things now to like they're kind of watchable, right? Like the Langford fireman Jim Flynn, for instance, I was watching and it looked
Yeah,
really, really good. Or even my God, someone restored enough to it, Corbett, Fitzsimmons, to the point where you can actually kind of see like the action of it and like get a sense of what was going on instead of them just kind of being like
yeah.
little two pong balls bouncing around.
The frame rate's messed up, and then like I mean, it's actually a somewhat complex issue that has to do with frame rates and the type of film, and then on top of that, the kind of projector that you play them on, and so like you have to find the right medium. And so otherwise you wind up getting a bunch of frames missing and it looks like shit, which it does anyway because the frame rate's weird. And that's why they're all like, look like they're like fucking moving all funny and shit. You can mess with it, but anyway, like you said, some people have restored some of these things and they're, doing some
God's
absolutely,
work.
yeah, ridiculous work. But also, what it does show is that while Ad Wolgast was fairly sloppy, while he was kind of wild, he was tough as nails, and probably, at least in terms of ability, would be able to fit in to a lightweight division like now. Like, yeah, he'd probably be underskilled, but there are a lot of fighters who do just fine that are underskilled, in their own division in the 2020s. So it doesn't really matter. But also, I think that this kind of ties into the fight that I was about to bring up. So we can go back even a little bit farther. And you also had mentioned like Bat Masterson and stuff like that. And that's also where a lot of like the tradition of refereeing and fight refereeing kind of got going, was going back briefly to the legality of boxing. They would often have law people on hand waiting to stop fights, or sometimes they'd even let them go. Like it was illegal, but somebody paid them off, so they would just be like, "Fuck it," like, "All right, well, we'll be on hand just in case some shit gets crazy, but then we're gonna get you," type of thing. And so there would often be police officers stopping fights, sheriffs stopping fights, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's Bat Masterson, but then there's also the ultimate lawman, Wyatt Earp,
Yep.
figures in as a definitely one of the more famous instances of what the fuck refereeing that you can possibly think of.
I think I know
And it
what you're talking about.
well, and it was also during a really famous fight, especially for the time and for the 1890s. Sailor Tom Sharkey pretty popular heavyweight, and also a guy who goes around and does all sorts of wrestling exhibitions and workout exhibitions. Just a popular guy overall. Bob Fitzsimmons, similarly, wrestling exhibitions, workout exhibitions, training exhibitions, like to go around and show people what he knew and shit like that. A popular fighter, and this fight between Bob Fitzsimmons and Tom Sharkey was promoted for like a portion of the heavyweight championship. And this was during a time when, I mean, it's a fascinating time you and I have talked about a lot. Sullivan to Corbett to Fitzsimmons, and then later on toward the end of the about 1899 to James Jeffries. It's a really fascinating time because a lot of development is happening, a lot of stuff is happening. A lot of these dudes are talking some weird and funky shit to one another and stuff like that. But right during this 1896 bout, again, it was promoted as portion of the heavyweight championship, even though it was not. But two popular heavyweights facing off in the eighth through 8 rounds. Bob Fitzsimmons is supposedly, giving Sailor Tom Sharkey the business. And again, this is important because Tom Sharkey is a fighter who is a longtime heavyweight contender. And I mean, if you want to talk about like a bridge between the kind of bare knuckle era, the rough and tumble era, and the more civilized or whatever Marcus of Queensberry rules era, he fits right in as a kind of bridge gapping those two eras without question because of his wrestling experience and because of his bare knuckle experience, and then going into the gloved era and fighting, James Jeffries for the heavyweight championship. So out of nowhere, and there's some really good fight reports on this. Unfortunately, no video, but Wyatt Earp is brought in to be the referee, and he's also a popular figure during this time as a former lawman, and everybody's seen Tombstone, so they know about his exploits and shit like that overall. But he's a popular figure as a former lawman, and he's brought in to referee this fight through 8 rounds. It's like he basically just kind of out of nowhere, when it nobody really understands what's going on, he grabs Tom Sharkey's hand and declares that Bob Fitzsimmons has been disqualified. It's like, wow. And in 1896 too, I can't imagine what this would have looked like to a crowd, because you also kind of have to remember that in 1896, with boxing being kind of new, it hasn't been introduced to crowds widespread. So they might not know all the rules. They might not know all the intricacies and whatnot about what's going on in terms of the officiating and what's supposed to happen. The Marquess of Queensberry rules themselves are kind of new and still being implemented across the U.S. as well as the rest of the world. So they might have simply seen Wyatt Earp grab this guy and go, "This is the winner," and go, "That's it? What do you mean?" But people kind of the people who were experienced, writers especially, saw this happening and went, "Wait a second, what the fuck is going on here, dude?" So one of the post-fight reports, if you go into BoxRec, says it was clearly an unfair decision, as the knockout blow was a fair punch on the jaw. He basically punched him. He decided that it was a foul blow and just disqualified him. The crowd became boisterous and cursed Earp loud and long. The unanimous sentiment was that Fitzsimmons had been robbed in the most cold-blooded manner. So, I mean, we've seen this in other instances too, where the crowd turns on the decision and goes, "No, no, 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 no." Like, probably the most famous one, especially during a title fight, being Siki Carpentier, when the ref tried to disqualify Siki, and the crowd stood up and was like, "Nah, bitch, not like that." But yeah. Anyway, definitely an out there type of thing. There's not even really all that much writing about it because
So I
1896.
have you seen both of them? Because there's been two movies made on him, right? On Wyatt Earp. There was the actual Wyatt Earp
Yeah,
movie,
yeah, yeah.
and then there was Tombstone. Was Tombstone made after Wyatt Earp, or was that like
They
loosely
were,
based
dude,
on
I
him?
think they came out the same fucking year, bro. I think they really honestly came out, if not, they came out within like 6 months of each other. The
Because
dumbest shit in the fucking world.
my parents liked Wyatt Earp a lot, so like I watched that with them. I remember watching that with them when I was a kid a couple of times. And I just remember it being long as fuck, even though I didn't hate it because it's interesting.
It's
Yeah,
two
right.
different movies, dude. Yeah, like it's two different ways to tell the same story. Like
But
Wyatt
what I'm
Earp is a
getting
little bit
at,
more like a long epic. Tombstone's a little bit more like if you're a little bit more like action oriented and you want to watch a more kind of fucking guy movie, you'd watch Tombstone.
but I want to say I don't remember which one it was, and I can't even recall how long ago that was that I remember this part. But I want to say that I think they loosely covered that in one of his movies.
Yeah, it was Wyatt Earp. It wasn't Tombstone.
Had to have been Wyatt Earp, right? Like they
Yeah,
loosely covered him in the ring during a fight. Do you remember that? Like during a boxing match
I
or
believe
something.
so, but I'm not gonna lie to you, bro. I think I saw Wyatt Earp like when it came out and never watched it again.
I mean, I've seen bits and pieces of it. Like I've never just sat there and watched the whole thing. Sometimes it's on TV and you'll turn it on and there'll be
I've
like a
seen Tombstone like fucking 50 times, but I watched Wyatt Earp once.
Hey, oh shit, and I just spilled a bottle of water.
Oh shit.
It's okay.
You Wyatt Earped that shit.
Exactly. Can I use this shit?
Yeah, I mean, don't use any of your fight shirts.
No, 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 no. I was like, is this a rag? I'm like, I just had a rag next to me. I'm like, okay, this is. I was just confirming.
Well, and it's you can't trust the movie depictions of anything that ever happened in boxing in real life. You know what I mean? Especially like around this time. Even it's cool if they did cover it, but you can't trust that shit.
Nah, but I mean, again, that's one of those that you can't. People are gonna have like various thoughts. Was Fitzsimmons screwed out of that fight? Was he not? I mean, it looked pretty bad, especially if he hit a legal punch on fucking Sharkey to knock him out, and then he gets disqualified blatantly out of nowhere for it. You have no explanation for that. And then him being Wyatt Earp, who's gonna actually step to him? As pissed off as you're gonna be, who's gonna step to him and be like, "Bro, I'm gonna take you out for doing that"? And you think you're gonna win a gun battle with that guy? No, like it's not gonna happen. You know what I mean?
Well,
So
well, and I
it's
mean, I think what kind of lent some credence to it or whatever was the fact that Tom Sharkey was tough as nails. And so
yeah.
it would seem, at least logically, you know what I mean? Like, oh, nobody's knocking Tom Sharkey out. Look at him. He was built like a fucking brick.
But
And
also,
so,
Fitzsimmons was on the hardest punchers in boxing history. So
and that was the kind of end of the story is that they rematched a few years later and Fitzsimmons took him out in a round or two. So it was like, well, oh, okay. I got you now. Might have taken a couple of years, but Wyatt Earp, you were full of shit. Or simply so inept that you can't be refereeing fights, bro. What are you thinking?
and that adds more to the lore of Fitz as it is too. He was easily the hardest puncher of that entire era. Maybe, but maybe the hardest puncher up until uh, God, who I mean, I don't know even know like one punch hitter. He was probably the in history up there until maybe like Langford or like Dempsey started coming around.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's probably a good call, dude. Because Sam Langford, especially because the way that he looked, he was small. He was a tiny
Yeah.
little guy, and he was occasionally overcoming, 30, 40, 50 pound disadvantages to like knock dudes clean out. And that was not something that people had seen since the days of Fitzsimmons, where that fool was just,
Yeah. And
he looked.
Fitzsimmons, I think, was like, I mean, a lot of those guys scored brutal victories. Jeffries, others, like nasty knockout stuff like that. But Fitzsimmons is like the one dude who was consistently cold cocking everybody. Everyone else was just kind of like slogging. And I mean, Kowinski could punch and a few others. Like, don't get me wrong, but like they weren't just knocking the little shit out of guys like Fitzsimmons. Like, no one took Sharkey out in a couple of rounds. Like Sharkey got his ass kicked by a number of guys, but no one just like straight up took
Yeah,
him
he
out like,
went 25 rounds with Jeffries,
yeah.
25 hard rounds, like
Yeah, with
it's
them fucking lights apparently over their heads that were like burning and
burning them,
through their heads and stuff.
melting
Yeah.
their hair and shit.
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
well, and point, yeah, and that wasn't the only time that Fitzsimmons did that too, where there were other fighters that lasted the distance against so and so or did well against so and Fitzsimmons, like Dan Creedon, was just like pop pop pop, and just that was it. They were fucking done, and like the descriptions of the fight and the knockout were just like so and so retched to the canvas, stiff as a board, stayed there for 7 minutes and couldn't be woken up until blah blah blah, and then had dinner. It's like, oh, okay. He was
And
putting
like
motherfuckers to sleep.
and others were getting so like holding bitter animosity toward up until their death. Like Fitzsimmons died relatively young. He didn't. Well, he died what in his 40s, maybe I think, or something.
Gosh, yeah, he was like 50 or something like he was pretty young. And
Really
he
young.
he looked like shit, dude. He was always wearing like heavy makeup in his later years and he looked like shit.
Yeah, I know he had something that made him that he died young of, but like Kowinski died in his 70s. he was one of those fighters that lasted from the bare knuckle era that lasted up until around the 40s or so. And so he was always definitely interviewed and talked about in the newspapers and all that. And I think I've mentioned this a few times in the show, and you and I have talked about it. He hated Fitzsimmons, absolutely fucking hated him for a number of reasons. And like, he would, and then, because they were bitter rivals as they were fighters too. Fitzsimmons had beat him when they were fighters, but Kowinski said he got robbed against him and, should have scored a knockout and all this other stuff. But it was like the old-timey like insults he was using. Fitzsimmons was a cur. I'm telling you right now, and you couldn't trust him with anything. If you shook his hand, you better check your pockets afterwards. All this other shit he was saying about him. And it was just, and then he would talk about other fighters, and in the interview, they said that every few minutes he would be talking and yelling about Fitzsimmons and railing, and then he would stop and start coughing and spitting into a bag because he was sick and he was literally dying himself, like he had cancer or something. But then he would stop and be like, "Hey, let me tell you something else about this. That MF would do this and that, and blah 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 blah."
Literally delaying his cancer death to talk shit on Fitzsimmons.
Yeah.
Well, in Corbett too. We talked about the legendary trash talk between Corbett and Fitzsimmons, but also because fucking Fitzsimmons knocked the shit out of him. Well, that's what's gonna
Sure.
happen, bro. He's gonna hate your ass. Well, Fitzsimmons, ridiculous character. We covered him pretty extensively in the trash talk episode. But yeah, I always thought that this was one of those kind of somewhat mysterious. There's no
Great
video
call.
of it, and that was the only fight that Wyatt Earp ever refereed. And we will revisit other kind of strange refereeing decisions as far as the who is refereeing and stuff like that. And what winds up happening often is former champions refereeing, and it's a bad idea quite often. But that being said, it's one of those fights that was always kind of steeped in mystery for me.
For sure. That's a really good call. Let me try to bring. All right. So actually, we're going to jump a number of years up until the 1980s because, well, first off, shout out to Boxing on Tubi now, the Top Rank channel. I've been a big fan of that. Have you been?
Yeah,
Most of them.
they'll have like a real good fucking like string, and then like they'll have some weird
Yeah,
shit
yeah. They
sometimes,
can
but
they can be
they'll
hit or
have some
miss
good shit.
sometimes. They can be hit or miss sometimes, but they're usually hits. Like before we started, they were just
I
playing.
watched Marquez Pacquiao 4 the other night. That shit's a banger.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
and
the
they have
knockout,
fights that
yes, but the fight's good.
they don't normally you don't see normally aired anymore, like if ever. Like Marvin Johnson, Eddie Gregory, or Saad Muhammad, Yaki Lopez too, stuff like that. Really good stuff. Anyways, they were airing Roberto Duran, Davey Moore the other night from Madison Square Garden, 1983. And yeah. So we can talk about like referee blunders and being like kind of joking about the last two that we did because you're wondering what the fuck were they doing or whatever. This one was just blatant malpractice to the point of what the fuck? Like a guy could have literally died in the ring right there. And it was just, I mean, it was a tragic night in general when you look back at that card in history of all the players involved and, what happened, especially with the undercard fight of Luis Resto and um, Billy Collins and, that glove fiasco. But Duran Moore is one of the most brutal, vicious, awful beatdowns ever televised in modern history, and all because of referee August and Ernesto Magana. I mean, Moore's corner needs to be held accountable for themselves too for keeping pushing them out there over and over because that's absolute bullshit, and you should know when your fighter has nothing left. But it's the way the fight ends that really disgusted me because I have not watched that fight in a number of years. I've watched it a few times back.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
kind of a
something
toughie.
yeah, and it's not something I just need to go back to watch because why, But um that being said, rewatching it now on Tubi, it was I forgot how brutal it was. And like the only thing that was making it kind of somewhat like entertaining in the sense that like I can kind of heat humor to it, not just be like, God, why am I watching this shit? Was the fact that the stream that Top Rank on Tubi has had Vicky LaMotta on commentary. And I respect a lot for Vicky LaMotta, what the crazy shit she had to go through with Jake and the fact that she made it through that and ended up having a very good life and all the other stuff. and wrote an interesting autobiography, yada yada yada. That being said, some people just shouldn't be on commentary, and um, her being on commentary that day just kind of added a little bit of hilarity to it because she had such gems as "Why doesn't Moore just run away from him?" and things like and things like that. You know what I mean? But that being said, it was just a sad thing to watch. It was a really really nasty like beatdown, and during a weird era of boxing too, because the early 1980s featured a lot of crazy shit happening in the sport, a lot of tragedy. In 1980, you had Gaten Hart knocking out Cleveland Denny, who ended up passing away on the first Duran Leonard undercard. Um, Kiko Bejinas getting stopped by Albert Davila
Davila,
for
yeah.
Davila, excuse me, for like was it the Bantamweight Championship or something like that, featherweight title, whatever it was. And he ends up passing away. These are all around the same time, right? And then the most high profile one, Duck Koo Kim being stopped by Ray Mancini, which was televised on national TV, and then Kim, subsequently passing away. So a lot of weird things started happening in the sport now. Like, well, first off, the sanctioning bodies started like slowly, looking at themselves and saying, okay, we can't have 15-round fights anymore. We're going to switch them off to 12 rounds. And each one started, subsequently doing that. And also another factor that started happening is that referees in the wake of the Kim performance started having weird performances in the ring. It was like some of them were being like way too
100%
jumpy.
spot on.
Yeah. People were getting jumpy, this and that. Like no one really knew how to handle themselves going forward because they didn't want to have a fucking tragedy like that. The most glaring example was
I already know
who
what you're gonna say. Go ahead.
who the fuck was it? It was
Joey Curtis
Joey
refereeing
Curtis.
fucking, yeah,
Yeah, Joey Curtis when he had
Dokes and Weaver.
yeah, Dokes and Weaver, exactly.
Yeah.
When Michael Dokes stopped Mike Weaver in the first round for the WBA title. And everyone was just kind of like, what the fuck? Because Weaver got dropped. Sure. But I mean, Weaver always came out cold. So he got dropped. He got up. He wasn't hurt. Dokes came in, threw a
Yeah,
flurry of
totally
punches.
clear-eyed. Yeah.
Totally. Weaver was blocking most of them though, but wasn't really fighting back. But I mean, he was blocking the majority of them. And then Joey Curtis jumped in inexplicably and was just like, "What the fuck?" And everyone started freaking
Yeah.
out. So there was just weird performances going all over the place that no one really knew how to handle things. But now it's 1983, and we're in Madison Square Garden with Duran fighting Davey Moore. Davey Moore is a young champion who kind of became champion by happenstance, meaning like he wasn't supposed to be champion in the first place. All right, that's how it goes by. Even though he was a young, popular fighter who was a part of America's, um, no, he was part of that. Fuck, what was the name of that?
Um,
Right now, I'm having a brain fart.
Tomorrow's
World Champions.
champions.
He was
Yeah.
part of he was kind of he was a member of Tomorrow's Champions, that whole group of like the forgotten 1980 Olympic team that should have made it. A heavily decorated amateur and all that. The reason why I say he wasn't supposed to be champion back then was because Bob Arum, for a number of years, and we discussed this on the show, was trying to break into the South African market. And after he failed miserably at heavyweight, he was trying to break into it at junior middleweight with a guy named Charlie Weir. Charlie Weir was a popular fighter, was a popular contender from South Africa back then, who was known mostly by having a silver streak
Yeah, the
down it.
stripe in his hair. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a silver
He was a
stripe in
good fighter, but yes, he was
his fighter.
definitely
Yeah,
known for that for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very unique look he had, and it wasn't like he put it there on purpose. He was born with
Yeah,
it.
that he just naturally had this like
Yeah.
weird gray streak in his hair. Yeah.
But he was an exciting fighter who was, making a lot of moves in the junior middleweight division in the early '80s. Arum wanted in on that because his heavyweight, it, trying to break into the heavyweight division wasn't working. So his way to try to break in with Weir was to try to take it was the WBA junior middleweight champion at the time, a guy named Tadashi Mahara from Japan. And he was going to bring Mahara over to fight Weir, and Weir was going to beat him and whatever. Thing is, Weir being from South Africa and South Africa being in the trials of apartheid back then, no one wanted to fuck with him, including boxing, to their credit. I mean, well, not all the sanctioned bodies, but I mean, like some countries. All right, I
Some
take
promoters were far
some.
more willing than others,
Oh yeah, I mean, well, not I
and
say
and some sanctioning bodies too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, countries for that matter. Because I mean, the WBA didn't give a fuck about going to South Africa. I think it was the fact that um Japan, for that matter, was taking a stance and were like, we're not going to deal with South Africa on this. So kudos to Japan for that. So Mihara wasn't going to go there. Aram says, fuck it, I'll find another route. So he takes Davy Moore, who was, like I said, popular enough and being, he was on NBC a couple of times because of the Olympic from the aforementioned 80 team that he was supposed to be on. So he was a well enough, known enough name. And after only like 10 pro fights or something, Aram shipped him off to Japan to fight Mahara for the belt, which he ends up winning. So he ends up winning that. Now Aaron's plans are set. Okay, well, I can get Moore to go to South Africa. There's no qualms with that. And that's what he was supposed to make that. And instead, Moore, upset the apple cart by beating the shit out of Weir and stopping him. So Aram's like, fine, okay, well, now I got Moore as champion. I can still market this. And it eventually gets billed to what it was supposed to be initially. It was supposed to be Moore against Tony Ayala Jr. And Ayala Jr., who I hate to give him enough attention on the show because he was an absolute piece of shit human. But again, that guy in the early 80s was on the fast track to superstardom. He was an incredible talent, absolutely precocious. He just
Yeah, he had everything. He was fast, great punching power, good chin, just an absolute piece of fucking garbage.
totally. And he ends up just imploding himself with all of his fucking the dumb shit he did out. I mean, the awful shit outside the ring, not dumb shit, just fucking awful shit
Yeah,
outside the
the
ring.
evil shit. Yeah.
Evil. Exactly. Evil, evil fucking human. So the evil shit he was doing outside the ring ends up fucking his career up and pushing him out of the side. In comes Duran, who's been having a resurrection in his career after fucking from 1980 and up until losing to Kirkland Lang. After he got brought back by Top Rank, he had a few wins, including a big one against Pepino Cuevas, where he started looking like the Duran of old again. And so they kind of figured, hey, Moore is in New York, Duran's in New York. We could put this in Madison Square Garden and sell a massive crowd. So thus the fight was set. And what happened?
Fucking got bludgeoned, bro. Moore, who kind of seemed like he came out of nowhere, but he was a multiple time Golden Glove. I mean, we talked about Davy Moore on a different show too, in the kind of a true crime setting a little bit because of his very strange and weird ending. But he was a multiple time Golden Gloved winner, highly skilled, good punching power, etc. But just I guess getting in with Roberto Duran, a motivated Roberto Duran at this time, a motivated Roberto Duran who had a point to prove, and a chip on his shoulder was the wrong decision, I guess. Nobody could have known that at the time because Davy Moore was highly talented and was, it seemed like Roberto Duran was on the slide. He was on the way down. Nobody knew yet that he wasn't nearly on the way down enough. And so Roberto Duran pulled just about every dirty trick that you can think of in the book, bro. Lacing, rubbing his gloves in his eyes, elbowing, forearming, pulling his head down, low blows. And, at the end of the day, I don't like that stuff. And I also, one of the things that I say about fouling and things like that is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And like I said, I don't like it. However, that's the referee's job to stop a fighter from doing those kinds of things. That's what they're there for. The referee's there to make sure that a fighter does not get absolutely fucking brutalized and violated, which is exactly what happened to Davy Moore and without question contributed to the, fast decline. But man, he just took it was an 8 round fight, dude. It looked like it was an 80 round fight. The guy took an absolute ridiculous beating. And this, like I said, was Duran who was just he wanted to dish out that beating. That was like the Duran against the last like 2 or 3 rounds against Ray Lampkin, where he was just like, all right, you've had your fun. Now it's my turn and I'm gonna fucking change your life. That's what he did.
And it's what really gets me mad too is that you're watching this and Duran is like round seven. Moore has nothing left. All right. I think at this point too that they said that his mom and his fiance were ringside and they both fainted and they had to be like, escorted out of the ring because it was just getting so bad. Moore's eye is completely closed. Like there's barely it's as bad as the Rocky movie, if not worse, when Rocky's like, cut me, Mick, that type of shit. Like it's horribly. His face is disfigured. He's bleeding from the mouth. His nose is messed up. Like his mouth and everything is shredded inside. Like he's just been beat up. Like he just I've seen like mugging victims, like guys just straight up ravaged, look less beat up than he did. And then he gets dropped at the end of the round. It should be stopped right there. The announcers are screaming to stop it, stop it, stop it. It's over. He gets up. The round ends. Moore's corner, who needs to be held accountable as well because they fucked up in that one and not saving him rounds before that, or they're washing him, doing everything like that, and then they allow him back. So they push him back out there, and Duran is like seething. You know, you can see it in those cold eyes of his that like he just hunts his prey and he feels it right there. Like this is it, you know, and he's about to pounce on him. And he's like smiling while he does it, and he's hitting him and hitting him. And this referee, who I can't recall if he ever worked a big fight after this again, I don't think he did because why the fuck would you allow him to, was just sitting there like a deer in headlights. And near the end of it, Moore's on the ropes and he's just taking punishment, and Magana is just staring, going, and you see Jose Torres and some other commissioners and stuff ringside, and they're screaming. They are screaming, "Stop the fight! Stop the fight! Stop the fight!" Like going over and over and over, and the referee is not doing anything. Finally, the commission starts going into the ring, get like kind of referencing the how you said the police would back then, like sometimes stop a fight if they felt they needed to, or whatever it was. The referee never actually stopped it. The people had to go in on their own to actually stop it.
Yeah, and we've seen that a handful of times, but it's pretty rare where somebody else is like, "Okay, fucking enough," and that's
Yeah,
pretty much
Larry
what
Hazard
happened.
was like, I guess, the best example of when he was commissioner, New Jersey commissioner in like the 80s and early 90s. There was a few times where he would jump in the ring before a referee would do anything, and he would go in there and just stop a fight. And people would like criticize him for doing that. And they were just like, and he was like, "Oh, my referee instincts took over." But whatever, you know what I mean? Like at that point,
Yeah,
he
I'd
needed
rather earlier than later.
yeah, he needed to be there that night because that was incredible. Like Torres was literally almost like in the ring trying to grab the referee's leg, like almost shaking him, like, "What the fuck are you doing?" You see everyone else is like, "Stop it. This man is literally dying right here." It's if you want to use a more modern example of like how bad like Mora looked, like think about Gabe Rosado and Triple G. And Rosado still didn't even look as bad as Mora did. But you remember like the urgency where um Rosado's trainer was like, "Bro, your kid is gonna die," telling Rosado's dad, like, "Stop the fight, stop the fight." He was like, "Yo," and he was like freaking out. That's how people were looking ringside. It was nasty. And poor Mora never recovered from that. That was like one of those career-ending beatings. You don't recover from a beating like that. You can't recover from a beating like that. You can come back, and you might think you have a little modicum of like your ability back, but your body never recovers from something like that. Like that was an absolute thrashing. And like I feel for Moore. I absolutely feel for Moore. He's a tragic figure and a guy that deserved a lot better than what he got. He
And
went in the
working his corner. Sorry to interrupt you, but just to point out, working his corner were Johnny Persall, who was a former light heavyweight contender back in the day in the '60s and I think into the '70s, and a trainer named Leon Washington who worked out of New York and had trained a number of fighters out of New York. So it's not like these people were inexperienced, but could it have been a case of like they just had seen so much that they weren't afraid, or I don't know, but they should have stopped it.
It was bad. Moore could have got killed that night. And it would have been allowed if it wasn't for people running in and finally stopping it because they were
It
allowing
changed
a
his
public
career.
murder.
It
Absolutely
changed
did.
his career.
Never the same. He had it. I mean, he had that win against Benitez, who was even more shocked than he was. But yeah, other than that, he was never the same, and it ended up just culminating in that tragic day in 1988.
Yeah, and which I mean, like I said, is its own. We already did an episode about Davy Moore, so we're not going to rehash the entire accident. But Jesus Christ, just talk about being unlucky, snake bitten, whatever you want to call it. Fuck. But yeah, there's absolutely, and Roberto Duran didn't do that. He wasn't driving the car, but he definitely, needless to say, and all of the people who failed to intervene that night changed the trajectory of his life.
He did. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I guess I don't really have one. Well, I guess the only thing I wanted to say was that you brought up a really good point, and is that with a lot of these major incidents, we do see that kind of like rubber banding effect, where like there's a major incident where somebody dies or gets really badly hurt. So then like we'll see a major incident where a fight gets stopped way too early, and then it like goes back and forth and back and forth. And that was kind of seemed to be the case here, where it was like Ray Mancini, Dooku Kim, and then a couple months later, Dokes Weaver, and that was too early. And then a couple months later, and we get Duran Moore, and it's too late. And
Mhm.
I don't know, makes no sense. These people are human, but bad call,
On the
bad
bad
call.
calls back.
Unfortunately, yeah. Man, all right. So I did this before when we talked about bad referee calls, but I'm gonna, bring him up again just because he's so bad and he's still refereeing fights. Luckily, he has not had too many major fuck ups in recent years that I've noticed. So it's possible that he has and I've just not noticed. But Lawrence Cole, dude, without question, and that kind of goes to what I was talking about before, where some of these guys are like widely recognized as bad at their job. And I don't mean like widely, I mean like commentators will bring it up. Like he'll be refereeing a fight that's on TV and commentators will be like, Lawrence Cole, he's a controversial referee. That's another way of saying he sucks, that he's constantly fucking up because he is. And again, not going to get too far into it. I'll simply say that his, I believe now late father, Dickie Cole, was the head of the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation for a number of years and was really close friends with Jose Suleiman. And I think later on, Don King. And I mean, he was one of the ratings, Dickie Cole, that is, was one of the ratings chairman of the WBC for a number of years, and I believe that he overlapped that job with being the head of the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and then mysteriously during that time, his son Lawrence gets a job as a major fight referee, refereeing all sorts of fucking big fights, constantly fucking them up. And seeing absolutely zero accountability for any of them. I'll go down a quick rundown of some of the fights, and then I'll choose maybe like one, possibly two of the worst ones because there are some egregious ones. Starting back in 1996, I know somebody's going to be like, Jesus Christ, Patrick. Back in 1996, dude, this shit happened on USA. It's not even on YouTube anymore. Shit got pulled from YouTube. So you can't even go watch it to verify it, but trust me, this happened. Rocky Gannon, yes, that Rocky Gannon fought a dude named Dominic Carter. Both of them were kind of like on the cusp of contendership, like I didn't quite get there. But Rocky Gannon was a little bit more, popular of a fighter of the two, needless to say. He was fighting on USA, like I said. This is one of the first instances of Lawrence Cole refereeing like a televised major fight or whatever. And he fucked up so bad he stopped the fight early, despite Rocky Gannon was about to fight Lawrence Cole because he was still in like such good shape that when the fight got stopped that he was like, what the fuck are you doing, dog? Like, what are you doing? It was bad. That was like that's his first outing. Michael Moore versus Terrence Lewis. That should happen on ESPN2. Not sure if that's on US or YouTube anymore either,
I remember
but
that fight.
Terrence Lewis like missed a punch and like accidentally slipped, so he's kind of like draped over the top rope, and Michael Moore just comes up behind him and just goes bap and fucking hits him and knocks him silly, like knocks him cold. And Lawrence Cole's just like, "Yep, that's normal. Okay, knockout. Bye."
Was that Greg Page?
No, it was Michael Moore versus Terrence Lewis.
Oh, because Greg Page did the same thing with Terrence Lewis. Do you remember that?
Yes, well, Terrence Lewis caught the bad end of a handful of them. Unfortunately, he was
Like
a
he threw a punch, he spun around. That's why I didn't know he got knocked out twice like that. Like
Yeah,
he's
it was Michael Moore. It was during Michael Moore's comeback in the early 2000s, and he
yeah.
fucking God, it was a mess, dude. This shit happened
Greg
on
Page.
ESPN too. Teddy was calling it out and everything. Teddy was like, "What the fuck is this shit, dude?" Like the guy's like got his back turned and he runs over and hits him. It was the dumbest shit, and it was kind of like I don't know what Cole would have even done because like that wasn't really his fault, but it's like just another instance. So, next one that I have logged Leha versus Ward, which ended on a technical decision. There were a handful of really stupid fucking calls made during this fight. And then you go back and you see that Lawrence Cole had refereed a number of Jesse James Leha fights, knew him supposedly, winds up getting stopped basically in favor of Leha when it could have been stopped a little bit earlier. And on top of that, the call made as far as the punch versus the headbutt was incorrect. All right. Anyway, moving along. Vernon Forrest, Shane Mosley, the second one. He actually ended the round early, right? As Forrest was like starting to put a whooping on Mosley, ended the round super early to the point where even Mosley, as he's getting a whooping, goes, "That's the end of the round." Total fucking idiot, fucking up on the big stage. Manny Pacquiao, Marco Antonio Barrera won. He fucking fucked up on the first call where he ruled Pacquiao down on a slip, and then Pacquiao knocked Marco Antonio Barrera down. He called that a slip. Totally fucked that up, fucked up the ending of the fight too, was forcing, basically Barrera's taking a beating and he's forcing Barrera's corner to step up and stop it, which they had no problem doing, generally speaking. Juan Manuel Marquez versus Jim Rex Haka. That's the well-known one where he covers his microphone and he's, come on, Wani, your head. And it's like there's a microphone right in your fucking eyebrow, you fucking idiot. Production microphone, stupid ass, with his stupid haircut and no neck. And he's fucking telling him he's ahead in the fight right when Juan Manuel Marquez is cut and, in danger or whatever. He's basically just covering up his microphone and telling him, just end it, just quit because you're ahead. What a fucking jerk. Chris John versus Rocky Juarez. That happened in 2006. I mean, somebody give me a pat on the back or a cookie for going back and rewatching this goddamn fight. It was so bad. Chris John, who are you? Why are you doing this to me? But it was so poorly officiated because Chris John was, like he fought a terrible, dull fight, but he just outboxed the shit out of Rocky Juarez. And all of the stupid ass calls that kept happening basically wound up making it a draw, which was the most dumb fucking draw on the face of the planet. Juan Diaz versus Paul Malignaggi. That was the fight where there's a cut. Malignaggi gets cut, and Lawrence Cole didn't see what happened, so he waits for the end of the round, goes over to the judges, and goes, "What happened? Was that a cut or a butt? Was that a cut or a butt? Was that a cut or a butt?" And then fucking adds their scores, adds their answers up, and goes, "But." Like he just fucking totally just fucking like totally just absolutely estimated, didn't even know, and then told them that. Told them that. Absolute idiot. And then next one, I know this is getting lengthy, but his fuck up or
This
lengthy.
is just wait. Go ahead. Just
Andre Durrell being winning by disqualification over Arthur Abraham, like that entire end sequence did not have to happen that way. But Lawrence Cole wasn't even close to being in position when Andre Durrell got knocked down. But what exacerbated it too is Durrell was trying to run from Abraham and was clinching to the point where it was like marring the fight. And Abraham was getting pissed off that Cole wasn't doing anything about it, not excusing getting hit on the ground, but he lost control of that fight, and that's why that foul happened. Manny Pacquiao versus Antonio Margarito. It was such a fucking awful beating that he sat there in the last couple rounds like this,
yeah.
just watching. Like there were a couple of instances where Pacquiao lands like 5 punches. He's like, "Bah, dah," like full force, and then turns to Lawrence Cole like, are you gonna no? Okay. And next thing you know, Antonio Margarito's eyes like this now permanently because his eye got fucked up that night. I mean, hey, may or may not deserve it. Simply saying. Marcos Maidana, Adrian Broner, we're coming to the end here. I swear to God. Adrian Broner, like have mentioned numerous times before, that people are like, "Oh, it's such a brave performance." Fuck that. Adrian Broner tried to get Maidana disqualified like 7 different times during that fight. That was an awful fight in that regard in the terms of the officiating. Fantastic that we got the comeuppance, but it was poorly officiated. Orlando Salido, Vasily Lomachenko, a notably poorly officiated fight where he let Salido, who I liked in general, beat the shit out of Lomachenko's dick all night long. Terrible. Francisco Vargas versus Will Tomlinson. This was one of the first instances where I saw Lawrence Cole doing the thing where he runs up and starts slapping the fighter's gloves down, like in the middle of a fight. He did that shit, and he right in the middle of the fucking round, he did it to Tomlinson, and then Tomlinson got hit with a punch that hurt him right when it happened. Absolutely stupid. So, and then what wound up actually the fight that made me make this list was Ricky Burns versus gosh, was it fuck. he has his brothers fighting now, Figueroa, I think.
Hmm.
And he was doing the same thing where he was slapping Burns' gloves down in the clinch. And then Burns wound up taking a left hook really hard right when he got his glove slapped down. And I'm like, dude, am I crazy? Am I the only one who gives a shit that he's slapping the fighter's gloves down and then the guy's getting punched? Anyway, I couldn't just stick to really one because it's so bad. He has such an awful history and he's still refereeing. I know. I really have a bone to pick with this guy, but Jesus Christ.
Yeah, bro, you're absolutely valid on that. I think beforehand when I asked on Twitter today, I was like that. I said, well, you and I were going to revisit this, and I think people, someone mentioned Lawrence Cole, and I was going to say I don't, and I was going to say something to the effect of like we can do a whole episode on him and McCanty if we wanted to. It's absurd.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, two nepo baby idiots who constantly fuck shit up. And in Mercanti's case, I'm sorry, but in both of their cases, they've been involved in fights where bad shit happened
And the thing is, I put Mercanti more on the blame too because one, he's been around longer. Mercanti has been around for over
his
almost 40
entire
years.
life.
Yes, he's
Yeah.
been a referee for like over 40 years probably. I'm not going to check his box rec record, but he starting with like, fucking Michael Dokes almost getting decapitated by
Razor
uh
Ruddock. Yeah,
Ruddock
dude.
in 1990. That was one of his early high profile fights, you know what I mean? So he's been around a long ass time and
Dude's
he's
like frozen in time in the corner.
that became a
Like
reoccurring theme with him.
to the
Yeah.
point where Razor Ruddock's got the time to just load up and like Jesus,
So
dude.
yeah, fuck him, bro. But we'll get back to Mercanti in a minute. But I mean, let's actually I'm gonna try to segue not what was it what not what was bad performances per se, but the show you give you a contrast of how you handle things under fire and how someone doesn't that how someone can't handle things under fire, if that makes sense. So
It's
first
got to be
off,
Mitch Halpern.
oh no, no, for first off, can we talk about Mills Lane's 1997?
I already know what fight.
Look, can we just talk about Mills Lane's 1997 in general, all right? And I'm not, man, this is the thing.
Yeah, no, that's true. He's got a couple that year. That's right. Yeah.
I'm not bashing him at all because I actually think he did a hell of a job for all three of these fights I'm going to bring up, guys. Considering this is what I mean by like handling things under fire and having a
That's
level
true. He did
headedness.
have a couple that year. Yeah.
But 1990s, I mean, Mills Lane, man, I love Mills. I love Mills to death because, well, he was just one of those guys we grew up with. You know what I mean? Like one of those referees that, sure, he was a character and like he had, with everything about him, he just had a certain way about him and became pop culture in the late 90s, with
Yeah.
being on
He became a caricature, but he was an actual, like, he was a
in a
real dude.
legitimately really good referee. Like you could count on him to handle the big shows because he was just a great referee in general, Until he had a stroke in the early 2000s. That dude was incredible. I love Mills Lane, man. He was just a great referee in general. You knew he can handle his shit. That being said, Mills was one. What's the saying that people say? A person, some people don't go look for trouble. Trouble just ends up finding them. You know what I mean? Like they're good people. Like they don't go looking for shit. It just ends up finding them some way. And
Hey,
1997,
knock that shit off. Hey, cut that shit out.
like 1997, that was Mills Lane. And so the three fights I'm referencing are the rematch between Oliver McCall and Lennox Lewis, the bite fight between Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson, and then Lennox Lewis's clutch fest with Henry Akinwande. Like, bro, how did he like not lose his mind during that year of like anything or just like promptly retire and become a monk or something? Like, I don't know how mentally I would be able to handle that type of shit.
Well, and it's not like he had a ton of fucking. The following year was the first Hopkins Allen fight too, so he didn't really get a big break, bro. This was just like he had a rough 18 fucking months, yo.
Gee, poor Mills. Like I said, he wasn't
Yeah,
looking
that
for trouble.
him pushing them out of the ring was the culmination of him going, "Fuck this refereeing shit, you fucking idiots! What the fuck?" I don't blame him.
Sure. But he did a hell of a job, though. I mean, that first fight between the first one, like McCall and Lewis, it's sad on so many different levels, and when you know the backstory on it too, that McCall was basically dragged out of a rehab center, had no business being anywhere near a boxing gym, let alone a fucking high profile fight, and being pushed in there by Don King. Lewis didn't look good himself that night too. That kind of gets like forgotten about over the years. He came in a little sloppy and under shape, and if McCall wasn't any type of motivation and had his head on straight, he might have been able to pull another upset there. Because if you remember the first round, he looked good. He like kind of surprised Lewis, and Lewis was still kind of like, wait, what the fuck? But then
Yeah.
soon enough, he had a mental breakdown. And once he started having that breakdown and no one knew what was going on, you see Greg, and it's crazy too. Like McCall's walking around, he's just stalking and he's crying, and um you see Greg Page and George Benton, who were his cornermen that
Yeah,
night,
just
trying to pull
shaking their
him in.
head like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. At first, they're kind of like, "What the fuck are you doing? Come on, come on."
Well, Greg Page is the one that's trying to pull him in. Benton, I really feel for because
Yeah,
like you almost
Ben's
want to
like, "What the fuck am I doing here?"
yeah, this is like almost harkening back to like the fiasco he had with Leon Spinks back in the, in 78. He's just sitting there and you see that disgusted look on his face. He's just like he doesn't know what to do. But um, Mills is going and he's like trying to talk to him, bro. You want to fight? You want to fight? Like anyone else would have been like freaking like other referees would have like lost it and not knowing how to handle it or just what if anything. He gave him every chance he could have. And then he ends up just finally like, yo, I gotta wash my hands with this. Like, bro, you can't fight. I don't know what's going on here, but it's over. He did the interviews like you said
Well, I
afterwards.
mean, like well, sorry to interrupt you, but he clearly recognized something was wrong. Like he
Everybody
clearly,
did,
you know what I'm
yeah.
saying? Like he wasn't like, "Oh, this is my show and I'm gonna fucking create a
Oh no,
spectacle."
and he never tried to
He
read her.
stopped
He
and
didn't
was
do
kind of like,
any of
"Hey,
that.
Oliver, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, are you
And then
okay?
when
Do
he
you want to
started
fight?"
crying, he almost felt like he was sympathizing with him.
Yeah,
Like
that's what I
he
mean.
was
Like
like, yo,
he
yeah.
wasn't like yelling at him like, "Come on, bitch," and he wasn't
No.
fucking mercantis. Come on, champ, fucking. I know your legs got fucking no calf, but walk. He was basically just like, "Dude, what's going on? Like, do you want to fight? Are you here?" Which sounds mundane. You're like, "So what?" But most referees wouldn't do that. Like you said, most referees are losing their shit and
Yeah,
fucking
they would
up.
have been losing. They'd be like, "What are you doing? I can't handle this. Why are you crying?" Like doing something. And Mills just kind of like, "Bro, you good?" Like, he has kids. He understood. Like, he's just like, something is off here. Like, I gotta try to. And then, so he eventually stops it. But you that would be enough for anybody to be like, "Fuck, man, that was a crazy ass year." Remember that first fight I had to do? He had two more to go. You know what I mean? The second, and then the bite fight happens. We don't need to hark on too much of what happened on that because
Yeah,
obviously
that
everyone
that
knows. But
sent his fame into orbit.
oh, 1,000%. But I mean, again, he handled that really well. A lot of other referees, like goddamn Steve Willis, imagine how he would have. Who knows? But like, my favorite thing was because he initially was going to disqualify him, and rightfully so. He was like, he bit him, and then Mark Ratner jumps up, and I think everyone understanding the situation of
Yeah,
the
the
money
magnitude.
involved
They're
and the
like, dude,
magnitude of
there's
the
a lot of
talent.
money here. Hold
You're like, you
on.
can't just, yeah, you can't. I mean, I understand that you can't stop it. Like if he's willing to go on, then
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, which, okay. Like, it
sure.
makes some sense. Like, all right, fine. He's the one in there taking the risk. I guess if he's
Yeah.
willing, go ahead.
And
But
I absolutely loved Mills Lane's comment when Tyson goes and he was like, "There was a punch," and Mills goes, "Bullshit, you bet him." Straight up.
like, hey,
So,
no, I agree with you. He handled it the way he should have handled it. The only thing that I will say is that he could have gotten on Holyfield more about his head. He probably should have.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
totally.
but you could also say that about damn near any referee during a Holyfield fight, and I like Evander Holyfield, so I didn't like that.
But
But the
it was still early in the fight too that like if yeah, I was saying a couple of rounds, say Tyson didn't lose his shit and bite him, that maybe Mills would have reprimanded Holyfield. I'm not saying I'm not gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't know, but like I would say maybe in a couple of more rounds, say things that didn't transpire the way they did. There's a chance that Mills probably would have ended up being like, "Bro, what are you doing?" Who
Yeah,
knows?
I have absolutely no question that Holyfield was pushed the envelope, like that he was like he was
Especially
needling.
after the shit he got away with in their first fight.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah,
have no question that I have no doubt that he was like needling him and that he was basically pushing the issue or whatever. But yeah, dude, you can't lose it and bite the fucking guy twice. You can't
sure.
fucking lose it and do that. But yeah, then the interviews that Mills gave afterwards, like the post fight interviews, were like, dude, people were kept trying to say like, well, what about blah blah blah, and he was like, oh, just knock it off. I don't give a shit about that. Knock it off. I was like, dude,
And I think one of
yes,
the comments he goes, "How many times does someone have to get bit, motherfucker?" I'm like, God damn it! He feels like he got bit. How many times is that supposed to happen? And he was like matter of fact about it, like a true, like a true dude. And then again, that's two. All right. Anyone else at that point would be like, you know what, man, would have told Mark Ratner or anyone else at the commission, I need an extended vacation. I'm going to Hawaii and don't call me for 9 months or some shit. He was right back in there. This time, Lennox Lewis, who had an awful 97 himself, going through fucking this fight and knocking McCall too and knocking one day. Now he has to deal with the Akinwande thing. And this one was the most, I mean, the Tyson one was the most high profile one. This one was probably the most annoying one to deal with just because he's such a small guy and dealing with these giants. And it's this funny visual of poor Mills. Even though he was so small, he was known for working with heavyweights because he just knew how to, like, he was a great ref. But you see him as a tiny, get up, what the, come on, God, like just trying to, the
That
hugathon.
was what was so bizarre about it for me, and I guess it's a lot of his hindsight, was Akinwande is actually a pretty good fighter. And it was like, where is this coming from?
And
Like,
when he let his hand go in that fight, he actually had success because, again, Lewis was still kind of like in the in
yeah,
between of
it didn't make
uh,
any sense, dude.
none
And it
whatsoever.
was like, there are times when dudes are clinching. That fool was refusing to let him go. Like he was like, no, no. And Mills was like, motherfucker, like fucking pushing him off and shit. And the guy was like, nuh-uh. You gotta disqualify. He 100% did the right thing. I just didn't understand. I still don't understand.
He even dropped
He
Lewis,
wasn't getting
if
his
you
ass
remember.
beat.
He even dropped Lewis. I mean, it was a flashiest of
Yeah,
flash knockdowns,
he wasn't
but
getting his ass kicked at all. That's
no,
what I don't get.
he clipped Lewis, I think it was with like a right hand. And Lewis, who might have been a little off balance, but he was stunned slightly. He dropped and his gloves touched the canvas. But regardless, I wanted to use that as a segue because those are three instances where a referee who had to go through a lot of shit kept his cool and was able to handle fire and put up really commendable performances. Bringing that in, you go back to 1965, and even though we talked about this on the first show, this is, the granddaddy of them all of not being able to handle anything under fire, Jersey Joe Walcott.
Gosh, dude, yeah, and it's funny too because it seems like it would be a one-off, but it wasn't one off. He was a regular referee and official, and then he was also a chairman, a commissioner in New Jersey, and uh, you know, I, such a. I almost don't blame him because there was so much going on, and he was distracted, and Nat Fleischer and shit like that yelling. But God, not a great performance on the biggest stage for the biggest prize in boxing.
And only that too. There was a thing. I don't know why it was like a thing. I think after Walcott, they kind of like chilled out on it. But for whatever reason back then, that was like a reoccurring theme where they loved to use high profile fighters or former fighters as referees all the time and like high profile fights. And sometimes
Some were pretty good.
some
Dempsey
were
was
pretty
fine.
good. And some referees were actually like they were actual referees after they retired. And so like you could put them in a big fight. Like guys like Benny Leonard who literally died in the ring refereeing one night. Or
Yeah, like an amateur show or something too. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I want to say Mushy Callahan was a referee at one
yeah.
point.
Also a
Junior
stunt and
welterweight
fight
champion.
coordinator. Yeah,
Yep. There was a few others. There was definitely George Latka, who was a lightweight contender for a number of years. He was the referee when Davey Moore died
damn
against
near
Sugar.
every heavyweight champion you can think of can
Yes.
came back later and
So,
refereed.
but yeah, I was just giving examples of like fighters who actually became legitimate
Sure. Yeah.
referees.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Even turn of the century, Patsy Haley, the old guy that looked like the crypt keeper in the middle of the ring, standing there for a lot of big name fights. He was a top contender back in his day. But what I was saying is that a lot of these other guys like Joe Lewis or Sonny Liston or other ones were just kind of like one or two offs, but they would put him in high profile fights. Like what business did Joe Lewis have being the referee for Joe Frazier, Jerry Quarry too, for example?
There was a
No.
couple where I want to say Bob Foster refereed a couple too, like while he was an active fighter, and it was
Yes.
like,
Oh,
what the
yeah,
fuck are
yeah,
you
yeah.
doing?
Totally. Sonny Liston was another one where they were gonna put him as the referee, I think, for the title fight between Denny, I might be wrong. I think it was Denny Mora against Joey Giambra, maybe
Hmm.
for the junior middleweight title. But
I don't
I
know
know
why
Denny
they did
Mora was
that.
one of the guys, but they were gonna put him in for that. And then somebody finally came to their fucking senses and they were like, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't put him in for a title fight as a referee because, well, he doesn't have any experience as a fucking referee.
I mean,
And
I guess in theory, you know what I mean? Like it make kind of makes sense logically. Like he's a former fighter, so it makes sense
yeah, I think
logically.
Liston was
But
actually was a current heavyweight champion when he did this. But they were just like, bro, we cannot have him like
yeah,
actually
that doesn't make
referee a title
sense.
fight. Like it doesn't make sense. So they let him referee like a couple of 4 6 rounders, and he was fine doing it. And if you watch him too, there's he has a photo of him refereeing. He doesn't look like a referee. He's wearing slacks, but he's also wearing a Thunderbird Hotel t-shirt. And he's just leaning over the ropes like that. But yeah, Walcott, the Louisville Fiasco is just I don't know, man. I think it's the most funniest thing you could ever see. You could put like that type of like bam 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 bam, bam like music in the background, and like in real time when you see him just huh huh, and then he just literally walks away from Ali and Liston. That's the craziest thing. Like Ali's running around. Walcott initially tries to like push Ali in a corner. Ali's not listening to him. Walcott, it looks like a parent struggling to like hold down their child who's like having a temper tantrum or freaking out, and he's just like, come on," but it's not working. And then Liston's laying there, initially just laying there, and then he gets up, looks around like no one's counting. Okay, I guess I got to fall back down now. Flops back over. Ali's still dancing around and screaming. Walcott then runs over to Fleischer, like you mentioned, because that Fleischer decides he's going to be the Holland, the Hale and Mighty, and get the attention of everyone. Joe, over here, and you see Walcott, huh, huh, and then he runs over there. It's an absolute fucking fiasco.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, it's not. You shouldn't be allowing yourself to get distracted by somebody ringside. You need to be fucking, paying attention to the action. Although, like I said, like, dude, what was Nat Fleischer thinking? Like screaming, rah, 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 like, dude, one guy is knocked down, the other, it makes no sense. But that also wasn't the only time that Nat Fleischer wound up getting, involved in a fight's result, for better or worse. But that being said, yeah, dude, it's not a good example of a former fighter stepping in and doing a fantastic job, and yeah,
Yeah,
not a
dude.
good example. Some great photos of it though.
I mean, it's an incredible listen. Like Neil Leifler made his entire career off of that. Who I'll say, preface by saying like he had some incredible photos over the year, like some of the most iconic photos in sports history. But his main one that everyone will always remember up, after he passes away millions of years later from now is the one of him standing over Ali. As I no, him, as Ali standing over Listing. But if it wasn't for, I guess, for Walcott fucking all that up and doing all that, then maybe that photo wouldn't even have taken place. Who knows? But
Yeah, that's true.
I just want to bring in like the example of one referee being able to handle, situations pretty well as opposed to another one who just like lost the fucking plot in this immediately and was like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. No, that's it's I here we are at the end of the show. But at that be, I still want to say, like, just out of fairness, it's not an easy job. You're on the spot. You have to make quick decisions and you have to make the correct decision. And you kind of have to think about a lot of different things and a lot of different variables and stuff like that. But you're ultimately being tasked with something and you're given responsibility. So you need to be able to handle that responsibility appropriately. And if you can't, then you probably shouldn't be given that responsibility. That's really what we're coming down to here on this entire show.
1,000%. And there's sometimes that referees they make the right call that sometimes can make a fight that you're just like, oh shit, or it ends up something that could have changed the course of history, except for that call. It ends up being, the right thing that ends up pulling out. Like, think about Fury, the first Fury Wilder fight. Had Jack Reese done what any of us would have done when Fury dropped like that, all of us, I think, in unison thought initially we would have jumped over and be like, nah, let's stop this shit. Like, you thought he was out. Reese, who's made a number of questionable calls over the years, um, for that one time had his head leveled and was like, I'm going to count for a minute. And then like Fury got up and was able to whatever happened, right? Or like, even though back then it was more part of the course for letting a fight continue, Larry Holmes, Ernie Shavers. Anybody today would have stopped that fight immediately the way Holmes got dropped and just laid there like, a shotgun blast. And he got up, and not only the referee like didn't even really question him too much, he just wiped his gloves and let him go, and Holmes ended up coming back to stop him. It's like sometimes fights just need to let the way they need to go. And sometimes referees make that right choice in being able to do that. A lot of times they don't. And so it's like funny and like fun sometimes to look back on, but also times it's like sad because it goes on both ways of the spectrum. Like, they just be like, it's like what the fuck moments where you can just criticize and be like, you're a fucking idiot, blah, 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 blah. And then there's other moments where you're just kind of like, this is crazy. And like, the last, I'm not going to bring up another one for like a long time, but like you can go on both sides of the spectrum. Remember how we said Joey Curtis stopped um Michael Dokes and Mike Weaver super quickly, right? Only 2 or 3 years before that, um, only 2 or 3 years before that, Wilfredo Gomez defended his title against Derek Holmes. I think that was in 1980. And that was and again, that was one of the most televised, worst beatdowns, unnecessary, just ridiculous, long ass, what the fuck is going on type, moments in boxing history where you're watching that and you're like, why isn't this being stopped? Holmes went down, what, like almost a dozen times? Some of them on his own way and stuff like that. But when you go
Yeah,
down
he
and
got
you're on
brutalized.
you got brutalized badly. Yeah, like really, really badly. And then Curtis is just standing there like, okay, go ahead. It, when they do good, you commend them. But when they do bullshit, they need to be called on as well.
And that's one of my biggest issues is that a lot of these, yeah, a lot of these referees and officials are part of the club, so they're not going to get shit talked about them, or the commissioners are going to have their back no matter what they do, no matter what kind of mistakes they make, which is the wrong approach. And
Mhm.
one of the prime examples of that is somebody who was inducted into the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago. And generally speaking, people are going to say, "Oh yeah, he's a great referee." No, he wasn't, dude. Joe Cortez was not a great referee.
Yeah.
He fucked up a lot, like a lot, and on the big stage too. And I mean, I'll just bring up a handful that are just in the back,
Beast.
like in the forefront of my mind because they're easy to come up with. Mayweather Ortiz literally wasn't even looking at the action when Mayweather, sucker punched, however you want to call it. I don't see that as a sucker punch. Ortiz headbutted him like 3 times, elbowed him. At that point, it's fucking fair game. The
Hugged
action
him 15
resumed.
times, kissed him on the cheek twice.
Yeah, dude, you hugged him, you kissed him, you fucking patted him on the ass. It's over. Now you got knocked out. The problem was that even in the photos, there's photos of the knockouts happening over here, and Cortez is like looking the opposite direction like an idiot. Like, what are you doing, dude? The one of the more high profile weird fuck ups of the 2000s that was super frustrating was Humberto Soto versus Francisco Lorenzo. Remember that shit where that fool's nose is like rearranged because he's taken such a fucking bad beating, and then he goes down and Lorenzo like Soto barely taps him with the softest fucking shot as he goes down because he's like in mid fucking combo and shit like that. And Lorenzo goes down like he's been shot, fakes it, and Cortez disqualifies him like on the spot. Like he didn't even fucking give it time. He was just like, ah, he fucked that one up real bad. I mean, shit, dude. Let's see, Maidana Khan. He gave Amir Khan like 3 different opportunities, despite being basically out on his feet in one particular round. I think it was round 10 or something like that. Anyway, he's had a number of different instances, and that's kind of that I think is a microcosm of this problem we're talking about on the show. Is that a number of these referees had consistent bad calls, or there's a reason for them, and there needs to be some sort of blowback or some sort of admonishment, whatever, and there rarely is.
Oh,
So
1000%.
sucks.
Like there's one too. So the last one I'll just mention it, and I'm not gonna stay on it that long, but Vic Draculich, who your face right there, like a little bit, I guess, not as high profile as McCanty in terms of just like, or Lawrence Cole in terms of absolute fuck ups, but still in enough he's done his fair share. But one that I remember, and I just had to look it up to recall that he was the referee for this. Back in 1994, Julio Cesar Green fought Lonnie Beasley on USA Tuesday Night Fights. And
There's always wild shit going down on USA Tuesday Night Fights, bro. Like always.
there was always some weird something happening on that fucking show all the time.
Uh,
It made no goddamn sense. So anyways, Green and Bradley have a fight. And the absolute funniest shit happens where Green is winning it. It's a rough and tumble fight, but Green has been getting the better of it and whatever it may be, right? And what round is it? It was round 12. All right, in the last round of the fight, round 12. They're in a clinch. Dracula breaks them up. As he breaks them up, he pushes Beasley slightly. Beasley falls back and falls down. Just collapses right there, right? Like as they break up and Beasley takes steps back and falls down. Dracula stops the fight from that. He just goes over, he looks at it, he goes, it's over. Like he basically from his own forearm, he TKO'd Beasley. So as he does that, Beasley gets up and he's like, what the fuck? Why'd you stop me? He starts, going at the referee. Before you know it, all of Beasley's supporters, which is most of the audience, just jumps in the ring and starts ganging up on Dracula, who has to run at him. Like they straight up
Fantastic.
bullied him at it.
You rarely see it happen in modern times.
Like they straight up mobbed him and got him out of there because they tried to, like, what'd you do that for? Like Beasley was, beat up, but it was the last round of the fight, whatever. He didn't get hit by a punch. He literally broke them up. Beasley took 2 steps back and fell down. Wasn't because he was like really stunned. I think he just, whatever. But like he turns around,
Fucking Victor.
but yeah, it just but a referee's job is just one of those under high stress. You got to make sure you know that like you can be able to work at a high level means that you're going to be able to work under any type of like multiple levels of craziness that you're going to be able to keep a level head, you know what I mean? And it's not an easy job, and that's why you see the same guys being used over and over because they're comfortable with the ones that they know who have been at this level before. And like it's sad though, man. Like it's sad in the sense that like a guy like Mitch Halpern, who, unfortunately killed himself back in 2000, and he's looked upon as a guy that even though he was really young when he passed away, he was in his early 30s, he was looked upon as
He
one
was
of the top.
good.
He was a very good referee. I mean, he had the Jimmy Garcia fight with Gabriel Relentless that Garcia ended up passing away from, but I'm not going to blame that on Halpern so much. I mean, anytime Garcia was like in deep shit, he ended up punching back. Like it was whatever. But,
Yeah.
if you look though, when I mentioned saying you always got to have like a level head at the highest, no matter what. His last fight that he ever refereed was a fight between Bebis Mendoza and Rosendo Alvarez. And this was what 2000 around there or something like that. And it was a good fight. Mendoza got won by disqualification because Alvarez hit him low a couple of times, but it didn't look like blatant low. Like it wasn't anything like bad that we haven't seen before. Like we've seen a lot worse. You know what I mean? But like Alpern just seemed extra chirpy, like chippy that night, and just really more jumpy than usual. And then like he warned Alvarez a few times, took a couple of points away, and then finally he just disqualified him. And he just seemed like, and everyone was kind of like, well, that was a little abrupt. And he just seemed really like whatever. And then like Jim Gray interviewed him afterwards. And if you wouldn't know any better, you would just think Jim Gray was irritating him because Jim Gray irritated everybody. But knowing that we know now, you listen to Halpern, and you can clearly see something was off with him that night, you know? And he's being interviewed, and he was like, yeah, he was like, well, I did what I had to do. What do you want me to? He got hit low, blah blah, and like he didn't want to be interviewed, he didn't want to talk to, and then he just kind of like walked off abruptly. And then a week later, he was dead. So it's like, who knows what sometimes these guys
Yeah.
go through and all that, but like. I'm not trying to end this on a grim note or nothing like that. I'm just saying that, like, when referees are on, they're gonna be on, and you can give them the credible, counting them for that and stuff like that. But
There needs to be accountability. And the bottom line is that the commission is not really providing much accountability. The ABC, the Association of Boxing Commissions, there's not real accountability with them. They don't really do anything, and don't really have any serious power that they ever exercise. And again, the commissions don't ever really do anything in these instances unless it's super egregious. So it's not like we're trying to organize a mob in these instances where a referee did a bad job, including against Steve Willis. And also, like I said, I've seen people say, "Oh, Steve Willis needs to resign. He needs to not be a referee." I don't know. I'm not making that call. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the call he made was poor, and what is the consequence for that? Because nobody ever really tells us. No, we don't
Mhm.
know. We know what the consequence is for Lamont Roach. We know the consequences for a number of these other fighters we've mentioned, but there never really seems to be consequence for the referees. So we have, I think, fairly acknowledged that it's a tough job. We don't envy it. Neither of us are referees for a fucking reason. I don't want to be a referee. You don't want to be a referee. That's not some shit I want to do. But the point is that you accept the job. You're given this job. You're experienced, and you're supposed to be able to do it. So we expect you to be able to do it. And unfortunately, this is an entire show where ran down a list of instances where referees did not do a good job. So I don't know what's going to happen with Steve Willis. I don't have any personal issue with him. I don't think that he's a bad referee overall. I think overall he's a fine referee in
I
general,
agree.
overall. So I'm not trying to say that we need to do anything to the guy. But again, what's the consequence? What happens from this?
But I mean, at the end of the day, though, like fighters, referees start like slipping too, right? I mean, look at Tony Weeks, who we've all considered a very fine referee over the years, and all of a sudden he started having some really, really wonky calls. Well, I mean, as you ran down Joe Cortez, and even during his prime, he had some funky ones, but like overall, the reason why he got into the
Yeah,
Hall of Fame, I mean, like he had more better ones than he did bad ones over in his prime.
no, that's true. No, that
Yeah,
is true. I can't say, yeah, like he refereed 1,200 fights and 1,104 of them were awful. Like I don't mean like that, but there
yeah,
were some bad, high profile ones. However, what you're
absolutely.
saying is true.
But
It
like,
is
yeah,
true.
at a certain point, some guys need to like lose the mantle. Arthur Mercanti Sr. refereed until he was around 80, 81 years old. And his last fight coincided with Ricardo Lopez's last fight. Because I think he refereed Lopez Zolani Patello at Madison Square Garden. But I mean, like, cool. If you're gonna retire at a big fight, does it need to be a title fight that you're gonna retire on as your last fight? I don't know. Like, like who knows? But I guess he was showing enough that he did, and he didn't do bad enough in that fight that it looked like he needed, and he didn't really have to do anything in that fight for that matter. But it's just at a certain time you gotta wonder because like things be happening. Even when you be watching like the old MSG fights and stuff like that, seeing like a dude like Ken Norton bludgeon Dwayne Bobbick, or when Norton himself got bludgeoned by Jerry Cooney, and you see like some of these old timey referees, hey, like slapping them on the shoulder or something like that. Fight's over. Like the fuck are you gonna stop them? Like, I'm not actually gonna stop punching anybody because you're smacking them on the shoulder. Like they're in the heat of the moment. Like things like that. You know what I mean? Just I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how to fix the problem. I really don't. I can only say that it's probably a lot of it is financial, for real. A lot of it is probably that a lot of these state commissions are funded a certain way, and that the funding is probably getting slashed year after year. I know that is the case for several states. I know that for a fact. I can't say it's the same for every state, but I would imagine it probably is.
Sure.
So, and apart from the states perhaps where the combat sports is actually deemed an important portion of what they're doing, like perhaps New York and Nevada or something like that, maybe California. Point is, what we would like to happen, we'd love to see new referees or new blood or new training. That shit costs money. That's money that they don't have and money they're not going to put toward that shit. So we're kind of stuck with what we're stuck with for now. But at the very least, all we can do is call it out. All we can do is kind of point to it and say that's wrong, and that's really all we can do. So that's what we're trying to do.
Totally.
I appreciate it, dude. It's at the end of the day, it's fun. We get to point and talk shit, but it also there is hopefully some accountability there. Hopefully, we're providing people a little bit of a reprieve from the bullshit and say that we do see that shit. We see it happening.
Totally. Absolutely.
Everybody who listened in, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Whatever podcast app you listened in through, go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment or rating. If you watched on YouTube, thanks so much. We appreciate you there as well. Subscribe, comment, etc. Go find us on social media. I'm not doing the whole rundown anymore because we're too scattered about now. So go find us. Aris Pina, Patrick Connor, thank you so much.
Later.